Welcome, dear viewers, to a journey into the shadows of American homes places. We expect to be safe, warm, and comforting. Yet, sometimes, the walls hold secrets. The floors hide whispers, and the air is thick with the presence of something unseen. Tonight, we will explore 25 true paranormal events caught in American homes. These are not tales from movies or books. These are reported occurrences, witnessed by ordinary people whose lives were forever changed by the unexplained. From floating objects and ghostly apparitions to footsteps in empty hallways and voices from beyond. These stories remind us that sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, and spirits linger where they once lived. In the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter, where iron balconies drip with moss and history breathes through every brick, there stands a townhouse that has earned a quiet but unnerving reputation. Locals now call it the Floating Chair House. The name was born from a strange and widely circulated video showing a wooden chair slowly gliding across a living room floor, untouched by human hands. It was not a trick of light, nor an easily explained draft, at least not to those who have spent time inside the house. The home itself, built in the mid-1800s, is a masterpiece of Creole architecture. High ceilings, cypress floors, and faded wallpaper whisper of another era. Its location places it near the old riverfront, not far from where yellow fever once ravaged the city and where countless lives were lost to disease, fire, and sorrow. The current owners, a young couple named the Duvaliers, moved in seeking the charm and romance of old New Orleans. What they found instead was something they could neither understand nor escape. It began subtly. Doors that were locked would creak open in the middle of the night. The couple would wake to the sound of muffled footsteps moving across the upstairs hallway, though they were the only ones in the house. At first, they attributed it to the quirks of an old structure, wood expanding in the heat, or vibrations from nearby but soon, the noises grew more deliberate. Whispers drifted through the air, soft but distinct, like fragments of conversation, just beyond comprehension. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the shutters, Mrs. Duvalier decided to record a video for her sister, showing off the restored living room furniture. As she panned across the room, her voice bright and casual, the camera caught something that made her blood run cold. The wooden chair near the fireplace, an antique piece she had purchased from a local market, began to move. Slowly, silently, it slid backward across the floor, then turned slightly, as if someone invisible were pulling it out for a guest who would never appear. She froze, the phone trembling in her hands. The video lasted less than 20 seconds, but it was enough to send chills through anyone who watched it. When her husband reviewed the footage, he insisted it must have been staged somehow, perhaps a trick of light or air pressure from a closing door. But neither explanation held up. They tested the room repeatedly. The floor was level, the windows sealed. The chair did not move again that night, but both of them felt the weight of unseen eyes watching. Word of the incident spread quickly after the couple shared the footage with a local paranormal research group. The investigators arrived one muggy evening, setting up infrared cameras, EMF meters, and temperature sensors throughout the home. Within minutes, the readings began to spike. Cold spots appeared suddenly, and without explanation, drops of 10 or 15 degrees in small pockets of the room. On camera, faint mists and flickering orbs of light appeared near the fireplace, hovering just long enough to be noticed before vanishing into shadow. During one session, an investigator placed a digital recorder on the mantel and asked, "Is someone here with us?" The response came 30 seconds later, faint but unmistakable, a whisper, barely audible beneath the static. When amplified, the voice seemed to say, "I'm still here." Research into the home's past uncovered a string of tragedies. In 1894, a fire had broken out on the property, consuming part of the rear structure and claiming the life of a servant woman named Celeste. Some believe her spirit never left, tied to the objects that survived the blaze, perhaps even the chair itself, which was one of the few items salvaged from the wreckage. Others speculate that the energy stems from something older still, perhaps the restless souls of those who died nearby during the yellow fever outbreaks that swept through the French Quarter in the 19th century. In later years, The townhouse served briefly as a boarding house, and guests often complained of strange occurrences. One diary entry from 1923 described the sound of someone pacing in the hall, even when all doors were locked. Another, written in the 1940s, mentioned a chair that would not stay where it was left. These details, uncovered by the investigators, mirrored the Duvaliers' own experiences eerily well. The couple tried to ignore the disturbances at first, hoping the strange energy might fade, but the activity only escalated. Lights flickered at odd hours, music boxes played on their own, and the sound of footsteps grew heavier, more purposeful. On more than one occasion, guests staying overnight reported waking to the sensation of someone standing beside their bed, watching silently in the dark. Eventually, the Duvaliers decided to move out. They never sold the house, choosing instead to rent it to a small production company that films local ghost documentaries. Every team that has entered reports the same phenomena: unexplainable movement, temperature drops, and that same elusive whisper caught faintly on recorders. One cameraman described seeing a translucent figure seated in the floating chair, its outline barely visible against a dim glow of candlelight. Skeptics argue that electromagnetic interference or subtle vibrations from passing trucks could explain the events. But believers point to the consistency of the experiences, the repetition of names and voices that seem to echo through time. Even those who mock the idea of ghosts admit that something about the house feels heavy, as if the walls themselves remember too much. Today, the floating chair video remains one of the most discussed pieces of local paranormal evidence in New Orleans. Visitors occasionally gather outside the townhouse, hoping to glimpse something through the shuttered windows. The city, already famous for its haunted cemeteries and voodoo legends, has simply folded this new mystery into its long tradition of ghostly lore. Whether it is the spirit of Celeste, the energy of past tragedies, or something far older lurking in the foundations of the house, no one can say for certain. But those who have stood in that living room, those who have felt the sudden chill, heard the soft whisper, and seen the chair glide gently across the floor, all agree on one thing. In that historic New Orleans townhouse, something unseen still moves among the living. In a quiet neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, where brownstone homes stand shoulder to shoulder and streetlights cast their orange glow across the sidewalks, one family has lived through a haunting that few can explain. It began with something small, a fleeting shape, a passing chill, a sense of unease that no one could name. But soon, it became something undeniable. Each night, as darkness fell and the house settled into silence, a shadowy figure appeared in the hallway, moving with purpose, yet leaving behind no trace. The family, the Rosarios, had lived in their Brooklyn home for nearly a decade. The structure was old but sturdy, built in the early 1900s. Its creaky floors and narrow staircases, typical of the borough's aging architecture. It had once been a boarding house, later converted into a single-family home. For years, they experienced nothing out of the ordinary, until one autumn evening when their teenage son, Marcus, saw something he couldn't explain. He had stayed up late playing video games in his room. Around 2 a.m., he stepped into the hallway to grab a drink of water. That's when he saw it, a tall, dark silhouette, standing motionless at the far end of the hall. Its shape was unmistakably human, but it lacked all detail, like a living shadow detached from any source. He blinked, and it was gone. Convinced it was a trick of light, he went back to bed. But when he mentioned it the next morning, his mother's expression grew uneasy. She had seen it too, weeks earlier, just for a second. She described it as a dense darkness, darker than the night around it, standing beside the staircase. She hadn't said anything, not wanting to frighten the children, but now, hearing Marcus describe the same figure, she began to wonder if something truly strange was happening. Over the following nights, the sightings multiplied. The shadow would appear in different parts of the house, sometimes near the bedrooms, sometimes just outside the kitchen. The family's small dog, normally calm, would growl and bark at the empty hallway, its fur standing on end. Cold drafts would sweep through rooms with no open windows. and the family began to notice that the temperature in the hallway would drop several degrees whenever the figure was near. At first, the Rosarios questioned their own senses. Brooklyn was full of stories, ghost tales whispered in old buildings, urban legends shared on stoops, but they had never believed in such things. Still, the tension in the house grew unbearable. They installed motion-activated security cameras, hoping to catch whatever was causing the disturbances. On the third night of recording, they captured something they could not rationalize. At 3:17 a.m., the hallway camera showed the lights flicker. Then, for 5 full seconds, a dark figure appeared on screen, tall, featureless, and solid. It glided from one end of the hallway to the other before fading into the wall. No one was awake. No one else was home. The temperature sensor in that same moment recorded a sudden drop from 72 degrees to 60. When the family reviewed the footage the next morning, they were speechless. There were no reflections, no passing cars, no light leaks. The figure's edges were clear and distinct, its form perfectly blocking the ambient light as if it were a physical body. They sent the footage to friends, some of whom dismissed it as camera malfunction, while others insisted they had captured a genuine apparition. The Rosarios contacted a local paranormal investigation team from Queens who specialized in hauntings in New York's older homes. The investigators arrived with infrared cameras, EMF detectors, and digital audio recorders. Almost immediately, their instruments began to react. In the hallway, the EMF meters spiked in the exact area where the shadow was seen. Thermal imaging showed a humanoid cold spot, colder than the rest of the house by more than 10 degrees. During one of their sessions, an investigator asked aloud, "Who are you? Why are you here?" Moments later, the recorder picked up a faint, whisper-like response. When played back later, the words sounded like "stay." The family learned that the home's history was complicated. In the early 1930s, a man who owned the property had vanished under mysterious circumstances. He had been renting out rooms to dock workers and immigrants. But one night he simply disappeared, leaving behind his belongings. There were rumors that he had been killed in an argument over money, though no body was ever found. Old neighbors had told stories of hearing footsteps in the hallway long after the man was gone. But over the decades, those tales faded into memory. After learning of this history, the Rosarios wondered if the shadow figure could be the lingering presence of that long-lost owner, perhaps trapped, perhaps unaware of the time that had passed. But others had different theories. Some suggested it could be a manifestation of residual energy, replaying moments of the past. Others believed it was something far older, a dark entity drawn to emotional energy, feeding off fear. The family attempted to cleanse the home through spiritual rituals. They burned sage, played prayers on speakers, and even brought in a priest to bless the rooms. For several days, the activity subsided, and they began to believe the haunting was over. But one night, as they prepared for bed, a loud thud echoed from the hallway. When they checked, the camera captured the figure again, standing completely still in the center of the frame. What struck everyone most was how the figure seemed to turn its head toward the camera, as if aware it was being watched. Then it faded, melting into the shadows. The Rosarios eventually grew accustomed to its presence. They no longer tried to capture it, no longer spoke its name. They described it as something that didn't mean harm, but wanted to be acknowledged, a remnant of a person who once called the house home. Guests, however, often refused to stay overnight after feeling a sudden chill or catching sight of a dark shape in their peripheral vision. To this day, the footage of the shadow figure in Brooklyn circulates among paranormal researchers. Some consider it one of the most convincing examples of shadow person phenomena ever recorded. Others argue that psychological suggestion, electromagnetic fields, or even carbon monoxide exposure might explain the experiences. Yet no theory has ever fully matched the family's consistent reports. The Rosarios still live in the house, and though the shadow hasn't appeared in months, they say the hallway always feels colder than the rest of the home, as if something unseen still walks there after dark, silently watching, waiting, and reminding them that in Brooklyn, even the shadows can have a story to tell. In a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Chicago, Illinois, a modern two-story home became the site of one of the city's most chilling hauntings. It wasn't a flickering light or a creaking door that drew attention. It was the unmistakable image of a translucent child, captured on video, walking slowly down the stairs. The homeowners, a young couple named David and Rachel Miller, had never believed in ghosts before that night, but what they saw through their camera lens changed everything. The Millers had moved into their home just a year earlier. The neighborhood was peaceful, filled with families and manicured lawns. The house itself was relatively new compared to the older structures in the city built in the 1980s, with no known tragedies or violent history. Yet from their very first week, they noticed small things that felt oddly out of place. At night, faint sounds of movement came from the second floor. Footsteps would echo down the hallway when no one was there. Sometimes, soft giggling drifted from the staircase, gentle but unmistakable. At first, they assumed it was the house settling or noises from nearby homes. But soon, objects began to move on their own. Toys left by visiting nieces and nephews would end up in different rooms. A ball once rolled across the living room floor, despite the house being completely still. The strangest part was the laughter, a light, playful sound that came at random, usually in the late evening, just before midnight. David set up a motion-activated camera at the base of the stairs, hoping to catch what he thought might be an intruder or perhaps a malfunctioning sensor. For 2 nights, the camera recorded nothing unusual. But on the third night, at 12:43 a.m., the sensor activated. The footage that followed would become one of the most widely discussed paranormal videos in the Chicago area. The video showed the staircase, dimly lit by a small nightlight. Then, from the top of the stairs, a faint white shape began to appear, small, child-sized, and translucent. It moved slowly, each step deliberate, as though descending carefully. The figure had the outline of a young child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, its form flickering like mist caught in light. When it reached the bottom step, it turned its head slightly toward the camera, and then it vanished into thin air. When the Millers reviewed the footage the next morning, they were stunned. The shape wasn't a shadow or reflection, it cast its own light, faint but visible, and its movements were far too natural to be a camera glitch. Rachel burst into tears as she replayed it, convinced that whatever it was, it meant no harm. But David, uneasy and skeptical, called in a local paranormal investigation team. The investigators arrived within a week, bringing equipment to measure electromagnetic fields, temperature changes, and audio anomalies. Almost immediately, their devices began to detect unusual activity. In the stairwell where the child had appeared, the temperature dropped from 72 to 58 degrees. Cold spots shifted and moved as though something unseen was walking through the space. They conducted an EVP session, asking simple questions. Is someone here with us? Can you tell us your name? When they played back the recording, they heard a faint but distinct sound, a child's voice, whispering a single word, "Hi." The discovery led the team to research the property's history. While the current home was relatively new, they learned that the land itself had once held another house, a smaller structure built in the 1940s. That home had burned down in 1963 after a fire that began in the kitchen. Newspaper archives revealed that a family of 3 had lived there at the time, a mother, father, and a young boy named Thomas, who was said to have died from smoke inhalation before firefighters arrived. When the investigators shared this information with the Millers, everything began to make sense. The soft laughter, the small footsteps, the faint energy that filled the staircase, it all pointed to the lingering presence of a child who once called that place home. The team conducted a second investigation a week later. This time, they brought a motion-activated toy ball, hoping to elicit a response. They placed it at the base of the stairs and turned off the lights. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the ball rolled a few inches forward. A faint sound followed, something like a giggle, light and fleeting. The investigators froze, stunned into silence. Over the following months, the Millers tried to coexist with their uninvited guest. The activity remained consistent, but not threatening. Sometimes they would hear soft running on the stairs, or faint humming coming from the second floor. On rare occasions, they would wake to find a small handprint on the fogged bathroom mirror, too small to belong to either of them. Friends who visited often felt sudden chills or a strange heaviness in the air, especially near the staircase. Some even refused to stay overnight after hearing laughter echo from the empty hallway. The couple's security cameras continued to capture occasional flickers of movement, brief glimpses of that same translucent figure appearing and fading at the foot of the stairs. Experts who reviewed the footage offered various explanations. Some claimed it was light refracting through dust particles or a digital glitch caused by low lighting. Others believed it was genuine evidence of residual energy and imprint of a moment from the past, replaying itself over and over, like a memory trapped in time. Despite the eerie encounters, the Millers never felt endangered. Rachel, in particular, grew to feel an almost maternal connection to the unseen child. On the anniversary of the old house's fire, she left a small toy car on the staircase as a gesture of peace. That night, the camera recorded the toy gently rolling back toward her, a subtle acknowledgement, perhaps from the other side. Eventually, the activity began to fade. The laughter grew less frequent, the cold spots less noticeable. It was as if the spirit of young Thomas had finally found some measure of peace. Yet even now, years later, the couple says the energy has never fully left. Occasionally, when the house is quiet and the night air is still, they'll hear the faint sound of small footsteps on the stairs, followed by a soft, childlike giggle that echoes just long enough to remind them that not all spirits are bound by tragedy. Some linger out of memory or playfulness, or perhaps the simple desire not to be forgotten. The video remains online, analyzed and debated by paranormal researchers across the country. In the heart of Savannah, Georgia City, where Spanish moss hangs low and history lingers in every cobblestone, there stands a home that has long captured both admiration and unease. Known for its beautiful antique furnishings and classical Southern charm, it has recently become famous for something else entirely: a piano that plays by itself. The home, built in the 1840s, belonged to the Whitmore family for generations before being restored by its current owners, Emily and Daniel Foster. The couple, enchanted by Savannah's reputation for elegance and mystery, purchased the property as their dream home. But within weeks of moving in, they began to realize their new home might be keeping secrets of its own. The piano sat in the front parlor, a magnificent rosewood upright from the late 19th century. It had been part of the house since before the Civil War, relic of a time when music filled the halls during evening gatherings and candlelit dinners. Emily, an amateur pianist, often played for leisure, but soon she began to notice something unsettling. Some mornings, she'd find the piano's cover open, even though she always kept it closed. The bench would be slightly moved, as though someone had sat there during the night. At first, she brushed it off, thinking perhaps she had forgotten to close it after playing. But the occurrences grew stranger. Late at night, faint notes would drift from the parlor, soft, slow, and deliberate. They sounded almost like someone warming up before a performance. When Emily or Daniel went downstairs to investigate, the music would stop abruptly, leaving only silence. Then came the night that changed everything. Around midnight, the couple's security camera, positioned in the front hall, picked up motion in the parlor. The video showed the piano lid slowly lifting, followed by the unmistakable sound of keys being pressed. The keys moved visibly, up and down, though the bench remained empty. The melody that followed was hauntingly beautiful, a slow waltz with a sorrowful tone. When the recording was reviewed later, it revealed no sign of trickery, no wires, no reflections, no visible cause. The Fosters were shaken. They shared the footage with a local historical society, and soon paranormal investigators arrived, drawn by reports of ghostly music echoing through the home. They brought infrared cameras, EMF detectors, and temperature gauges. Within minutes of setting up, the temperature around the piano dropped sharply from a steady 74 degrees to 59. When they asked aloud if someone was present, one of the investigators felt a sudden rush of cold air move past him, like a draft from an open window. But all the windows were sealed. The piano lid creaked slightly, as if responding. Then, in the stillness, a single note rang out. The team captured the entire event on video, documenting both the sound and the inexplicable movement of the keys. When they replayed the audio, they noticed something chilling. Beneath the melody, a faint whisper seemed to accompany the notes. Slowed down, it sounded like a woman's voice, humming softly in time with the music. Research into the home's history revealed a tragic story. In 1871, the Whitmore family's eldest daughter, Clara, was a talented pianist who performed at local gatherings. She was only 20 when she died suddenly from illness, just weeks before she was scheduled to perform at the Savannah Music Hall. Her piano, the same one now in the parlor, had been her most cherished possession. Local lore suggested that Clara's spirit never truly left, that her love for music kept her tethered to the home she adored. Neighbors began to share their own accounts. Long before the Fosters moved in, previous occupants had complained of hearing piano music late at night, even when the instrument was covered. Some claimed to have seen a faint figure near the parlor window, a young woman in a pale dress, her outline shimmering before fading into the shadows. Encouraged by the investigators, Emily tried a gentle approach. One evening, she sat at the piano and played one of Clara's favorite pieces, a soft nocturne by Chopin. As the final note faded, the chandelier above them flickered. The air grew still, heavy with an almost tangible presence. For a moment, Emily felt as if someone stood behind her watching, listening. She turned, but no one was there. After that night, the activity seemed to take on a rhythm. The piano would play most often around midnight, usually on calm, moonlit nights. The melodies were always similar, graceful, mournful, and filled with emotion. Sometimes, the music drifted through the house even when no one was awake, captured faintly on audio recordings as though the piano were performing for an unseen audience. Experts who analyzed the recordings were divided. Some suggested electromagnetic interference or vibrations from distant traffic could trigger the keys. Though no mechanical malfunction was ever found, others believed the events to be genuine evidence of a residual haunting of replay of past energy forever looping through time. The Fosters eventually made peace with their ghostly musician. They stopped trying to explain or eliminate the phenomenon. Instead, they embraced it. They would light a candle in the parlor each night, leaving the piano open, as if inviting Clara to play. Visitors to the home occasionally hear faint strains of music even when the room is empty. Some describe the melodies as comforting, others as deeply sorrowful notes that seem to echo from a time long past. One particularly chilling event occurred during a severe thunderstorm. Lightning struck nearby, cutting the power. In the darkness, as rain pounded the windows, the piano began to play again, louder this time. The same haunting waltz that had first been recorded. The notes rang through the dark house, filling it with eerie beauty. When the storm passed and the lights returned, the piano lid was gently closed, and the room had grown noticeably warmer, as if the presence had finally found calm. Today, the mysterious piano of Savannah is a well-known legend among locals. Paranormal enthusiasts and tourists often stop by the street, hoping to hear faint traces of music through the windows. The Fosters rarely allow cameras anymore, preferring to protect the privacy of their ghostly guest. They claim the spirit isn't malevolent, just lonely, perhaps longing to be remembered for the music she loved so much. The piano remains in perfect condition, its keys polished, its sound rich and full. Every so often, during quiet evenings, when the moonlight spills across the parlor floor, Emily swears she can hear soft humming accompanying the distant strains of piano music, as if Clara Whitmore herself still sits at her beloved instrument, playing for the house and for the city that never forgets its ghosts. In one of Boston's oldest neighborhoods, where colonial-era homes line the narrow streets, and history seems to linger in the air, there stands a brick residence that has drawn the attention of both historians and paranormal researchers alike. Built in the late 1700s, the house appears unremarkable at first glance, a beautifully preserved piece of early American architecture, its wooden beams and stone fireplace testaments to another time. But in recent years, this peaceful home has become the center of one of Massachusetts' most unsettling hauntings, the case of the levitating objects. The story began when the current homeowner Thomas Avery, moved into the property with his wife and daughter. The family had purchased the home for its charm and character, drawn to its colonial craftsmanship and quiet setting. For the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. They spent evenings restoring furniture, uncovering old features hidden beneath decades of renovations, and admiring the house's historical details. But then, the atmosphere began to shift. It started subtly. The family noticed small objects, books, utensils, even picture frames appearing in places they hadn't left them. Doors would open slightly on their own, and the faint sound of whispers sometimes drifted through the hallways late at night. At first, they assumed it was simply an effect of an old house settling or air pressure from the drafty windows. But what they witnessed next shattered any attempt at a rational explanation. One evening, as Thomas sat reading in the living room, a paperweight from his desk slowly lifted off the table. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But the object rose several inches, hovered in midair for nearly 5 seconds, and then dropped to the floor with a dull thud. He stood frozen, heart pounding, unable to comprehend what he had just seen. Days later, his wife reported seeing a candle holder glide across the mantel without being touched. Their daughter, terrified, refused to enter the living room after witnessing a teacup float upward and spin slowly before crashing to the ground. The family installed multiple security cameras throughout the house, hoping to capture evidence of what was happening. The footage that followed stunned everyone who saw it. In one clip, recorded at 11:43 p.m., a heavy book can be seen lifting off the coffee table, hovering at waist height for several seconds, and then falling to the floor. Another video showed a chair shifting 2 feet across the room with no visible source of movement. The events were too clear to be dismissed as tricks of light or vibration. When the videos surfaced online, a team of paranormal investigators from New England Paranormal Research Society reached out to the family and offered to study the case. The investigators arrived equipped with electromagnetic field detectors, infrared cameras, and EVP recorders. They began by conducting a thorough sweep of the house, documenting temperature changes and electromagnetic anomalies. In the living room where most of the activity had occurred, EMF readings spiked erratically, far above normal levels. During an EVP session, one investigator asked, "Who is in this house? Can you tell us your name?" For a moment, there was silence. Then, faintly, a whisper emerged through the static. The voice spoke in a language none of them could identify, rhythmic and almost chant-like. The team later analyzed the recording and sent it to a linguistics expert, who confirmed it did not match any modern or commonly spoken language. As the night continued, more strange phenomena unfolded. One investigator reported feeling sudden pressure on his chest, as though invisible hands were pressing down on him. Another described being shoved lightly from behind while standing near the fireplace, even though no one else was close. Several team members noted feeling dizzy and short of breath while inside the living room, sensations that vanished as soon as they stepped outside. The next morning, the investigators reviewed the overnight footage. Multiple objects, small ornaments, books, and a candlestick could be seen lifting from their surfaces and hovering briefly before falling. In one segment, an entire throw pillow floated upward and landed several feet away. There were no strings, no evidence of tampering, and the phenomena appeared to occur at random intervals. Research into the home's history revealed disturbing details. In the late 1700s, the property had been owned by a man named Elias Corbin, a ship captain known for his involvement in maritime trade during the Revolutionary period. According to historical records, Corbin was accused of illegal dealings with foreign traders and was rumored to have dabbled in esoteric practices, bringing back strange artifacts and manuscripts from his voyages. One record even mentioned that the original foundation of the home had been constructed over the remains of an older structure, possibly a meeting place used for ritual gatherings during the colonial era. Some historians believe that Corbin's reputation for secretive practices may have contributed to the energy lingering in the house. Local legends claim that before his mysterious disappearance at sea, Corbin was seen muttering prayers in an unknown tongue while sealing a crate in the basement. That crate was never found. The paranormal investigators theorized that the disturbances could be linked to these older energies, possibly residual forces or entities awakened by the recent renovations. The whispering in an unknown language, the physical manifestations, and the sensations of invisible pressure all pointed toward an intelligent haunting, something capable of interaction and physical influence. When the team attempted to communicate again, they asked, "Are you the one moving these things?" The recorder captured a single, chilling response, a breathy yes, followed by another burst of whispers in the same strange dialect. The investigators, unnerved, ended the session early. After the investigation, the family sought help from a local priest who performed a blessing throughout the home. For several weeks afterward, the activity diminished, but it never truly stopped. Occasionally, Thomas still hears faint whispers when walking past the living room late at night. Objects no longer levitate, but small disturbances persist. A book found open to a random page, a candle toppled, a picture slightly crooked. Experts remain divided on the case. Some suggest that seismic vibrations or electromagnetic fluctuations could have caused the movement of lightweight objects, though no definitive scientific explanation has ever been established. Others argue that the evidence, particularly the EVPs and the consistency of physical manifestations, points to one of the most credible hauntings in modern Boston history. Today, the home remains occupied by the Avery family, who have grown used to the occasional odd occurrence. They speak of the presence in the house not with fear, but with a kind of wary respect. Thomas often says it feels like sharing space with something ancient and unseen, something that was here long before them, and may still linger long after they're gone. The footage of the levitation has been analyzed by paranormal experts worldwide and continues to spark debate. Whether it is the restless spirit of a long-dead sailor, the echo of forgotten rituals, or an unexplainable natural phenomenon, no one can say for sure. But within that colonial-era home in Boston, objects once rose into the air, as though weightless, moved by hands that cannot be seen, guided by whispers from a time no living person remembers. In Charleston, South Carolina, where cobblestone streets and antebellum homes echo with the whispers of centuries past, one family's experience in a restored 18th-century townhouse became the talk of the local paranormal community. The home, located just off Meeting Street, had been lovingly renovated, with its wooden floors polished and its original fireplace carefully preserved. But one evening, as the family gathered in the living room, something appeared that would challenge their understanding of reality. An apparition of a woman in period clothing, as solid and detailed as any living person, standing silently near the flickering firelight. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light, perhaps a reflection or the shadows playing against the old brick. But as they watched, the woman's figure seemed to shimmer with an almost tangible presence. She was dressed in a long gown of faded blue satin, her hair gathered neatly under a lace bonnet. Her expression was calm but melancholy, as if caught in the weight of some unspoken sorrow. When one of the family members tried to step closer, she vanished instantly, as though pulled away by the very air that surrounded her. That moment marked the beginning of a haunting that would unfold night after night. The family began to hear soft footsteps crossing the hardwood floors long after everyone had gone to bed. Doors that had been securely closed would creak open on their own. The air near the fireplace, even on warm evenings, turned unnaturally cold. Sometimes, the faint scent of lavender filled the room, a fragrance none of them owned or used. Convinced that something was happening beyond explanation, they installed cameras in several rooms, hoping to capture evidence of what they were experiencing. For days, nothing unusual appeared on the footage until one early morning. At 3:07 a.m., one of the cameras caught a flicker of motion near the fireplace. Slowly, the same woman came into view, her form faintly illuminated by the glow of the nightlight. She stood motionless for nearly a minute before fading out of sight. The footage was clear enough to reveal the lace detailing of her dress, and even the faint glint of what appeared to be a pendant hanging around her neck. Word of the footage spread quickly through Charleston's close-knit community of ghost hunters and historians. Paranormal investigators arrived within days, eager to explore the home's unsettling mystery. They brought with them EMF meters, thermal cameras, and EVP recorders. As the team began their investigation, they immediately noted several cold spots around the living room, particularly near the fireplace where the apparition had appeared. The temperature would drop abruptly by as much as 15 degrees, only to rise again moments later. When they played back their first EVP recordings, the investigators were stunned. Amid the soft hum of background noise came a woman's voice, faint but distinct. It spoke just 2 words: "I'm here." Another recording captured what seemed to be her name, whispered so softly it was barely audible: Eleanor. Research into the home's history revealed that in the early 1800s, the townhouse had belonged to a merchant and his wife, Eleanor Prescott. According to old city records, Eleanor died tragically during a yellow fever outbreak that swept through Charleston in 1820. Local lore suggested that she passed away in the very same room where the family had first seen her ghostly image. Her husband, heartbroken, reportedly never remarried and kept her belongings untouched until his own death years later. This revelation only deepened the mystery. Was the apparition truly Eleanor Prescott, still tied to the place she had loved most in life? The family, once fearful, began to feel a strange compassion for the presence. They described her as gentle, almost protective, never threatening. At times, they claimed to hear faint humming, as though she were softly singing to herself near the fire. Still, there were moments of unease. Guests who stayed overnight in the home often reported waking suddenly, feeling as if someone were standing at the foot of the bed. A few described seeing a pale blue glow drifting through the hallway before fading into nothingness. The paranormal investigators returned multiple times, each visit adding another layer to the story. They noted consistent EMF spikes near the fireplace and captured more EVPs, including one chilling recording where a woman's voice seemed to whisper, "He promised." This phrase led to speculation that Eleanor might still be waiting for her husband, a promise unfulfilled even after death. Local historians grew fascinated by the case. Some suggested that the apparition could be a residual haunting, an echo of a moment from the past replaying itself. Others believed it might be an intelligent spirit, aware of her surroundings and attempting to communicate. Regardless of the explanation, the atmosphere of the home was undeniable. Even skeptics admitted feeling a heaviness in the air, a palpable energy that seemed to linger long after they left. On quiet evenings, when the wind rattled the shutters and the city outside fell silent, the family often found themselves glancing toward the fireplace, half expecting to see Eleanor standing there again. As time passed, the appearances grew less frequent but never fully stopped. The family chose not to move, believing that whatever spirit remained meant no harm. They continued to document each occurrence, adding to a growing archive of videos, EVPs, and temperature readings. One of Charleston's most compelling modern hauntings, in the heart of a city known for its ghost stories, from the restless spirits of old plantations to the shadows of colonial cemeteries, the apparition of the woman in the blue dress remains one of the most intimate and poignant tales. Whether she is the lingering essence of Eleanor Prescott or merely an imprint of grief and love preserved in time, her story endures as a reminder of how history breathes quietly within Charleston's walls, and how sometimes the past still chooses to be seen. In a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, a family began noticing something unusual on their home's security footage: shadows that moved on their own. At first, they assumed it was a trick of light or the passing headlights from a nearby street. But when the shapes began to dance across walls and floors, even in total darkness, their disbelief turned into fear. What began as small, fleeting glimpses soon became nightly visitations that left the family questioning what truly lingered within their home. It started one autumn evening when the mother, Claire, was reviewing footage from their security system after hearing faint noises upstairs. Around midnight, the camera in the living room showed a shadow sweeping across the floor, smooth and swift, as though someone had walked through the room. But the lights were off, the blinds were drawn, and every member of the family had been asleep. The shadow had no clear form, but it stretched unnaturally long, like a figure dancing just beyond the reach of comprehension. Over the next week, the shadows returned. Sometimes there were 2 or 3, flickering against the walls as if playing. They would twist and merge, stretching toward the ceiling before vanishing entirely. The family's 2 children claimed they heard laughter of high-pitched giggles coming from the hall outside their bedrooms. At first, their parents dismissed it as imagination. But soon, the laughter became impossible to ignore. It drifted through the air late at night, accompanied by the sound of light footsteps running across the hardwood floors, even though the children were sound asleep. Claire and her husband, Daniel, began to feel uneasy in their own home. They double-checked doors, replaced light bulbs, and even inspected the cameras for malfunction, but nothing explained what they were seeing. The shadows didn't behave like reflections or flickers of passing light. They had weight, shape, and movement that seemed almost alive. One night, Daniel decided to stay up and watch in person. He turned off all the lights and sat quietly in the living room. Around 2:30 a.m., the air grew noticeably colder. The faint smell of earth and old wood filled the space, as though the walls themselves were breathing. Then, from the corner of his eye, Daniel saw a dark shape gliding across the wall near the television. It stopped for a moment, as if aware of his gaze, before darting across the ceiling and dissolving into the hallway. Moments later came the unmistakable sound of giggling 2 voices, distant yet distinct, echoing softly down the hall. The family's unease deepened into dread when their youngest daughter began speaking to someone who wasn't there. She called them the Shadow Kids and said they liked to play when the lights were off. When asked what they looked like, she said, "They don't have faces, but they laugh a lot." Her drawings showed black silhouettes holding hands, their bodies twisting and swirling like smoke. Desperate for answers, Claire reached out to a local paranormal investigation group in Portland, known for examining hauntings in old homes. When the team arrived, they brought cameras, motion sensors, and digital recorders. As soon as they entered the house, several members reported feeling cold drafts and unexplained static in the air. One investigator noted that the atmosphere seemed charged, as if energy were moving through the space. They set up their equipment in the living room, the heart of the activity, and began recording. Within the first hour, motion sensors triggered several times, despite no visible movement. The temperature fluctuated rapidly, dropping 10 degrees in seconds. On their infrared cameras, dark masses appeared to shift across the floor, undulating like living shadows. At one point, one of the investigators gasped as a small, hand-shaped outline appeared briefly on the wall beside her, before vanishing. When reviewing the EVP recordings later that night, the team heard faint giggles exactly as the family had described. One voice whispered, "Play with us." Another, softer, said, "Don't turn on the lights." There was also a rhythmic tapping in the background, like someone drumming their fingers on wood. The investigators began researching the history of the property and discovered that the land had once been part of a 19th-century orphanage that burned down in the early 1900s. Dozens of children had lived there, and while records were incomplete, it was believed several perished in the fire. The foundations of the orphanage still lay buried beneath the neighborhood, forgotten beneath layers of modern construction. This revelation chilled the family. The idea that the spirits of lost children could be reaching out from beneath their home seemed both tragic and terrifying. Yet, the childlike nature of the activity made it difficult to view the haunting as malevolent. There were no threats, no harm, only playfulness, tinged with loneliness. Still, the disturbances escalated. The shadows became bolder, appearing not just on the walls, but on the floors, the furniture, and even in reflections. Guests who stayed overnight reported hearing faint footsteps near their beds or feeling small hands brush against their arms. On one occasion, Claire saw a dark silhouette standing behind her reflection in the bathroom mirror, motionless, featureless, and silently watching. A cleansing ceremony was performed by a local spiritual advisor, who lit sage and recited prayers meant to guide lost spirits toward peace. For several nights afterward, the home was still. No giggles, no footsteps, no moving shadows. The family hoped it was over. But a week later, the youngest daughter woke crying, saying her friends were sad because they couldn't find her anymore. That same night, The cameras picked up a final moment of movement to faint shadowy figures twirling across the living room floor as though dancing together before fading into nothingness. Since then, the home has remained largely quiet, though the family still feels an occasional chill near the corners of certain rooms. Visitors sometimes claim to see faint motion in the darkened hallways or hear soft laughter when the wind blows through the house. Whether these are remnants of the haunting or just echoes of memory, no one can say. In Portland, where rain and mist often blur the edges between light and shadow, the story of the dancing shadows has become one of quiet fascination. Neighbors still whisper about the house where laughter was heard, with no children around, and where shadows seem to have lives of their own. For those who believe, it stands as a reminder that even the most innocent of spirits can leave their mark lingering in the spaces between light and dark, waiting for someone to notice their playful, spectral dance once more. In a quiet Denver neighborhood, a family's ordinary life was turned upside down when their home became the center of violent and unexplainable disturbances. What began as small annoyances, a flickering light, a door creaking open, soon escalated into full-blown chaos. Objects began to move on their own, slamming against walls or flying across rooms. Drawers opened and closed violently, books fell from shelves, and plates slid off countertops as if guided by unseen hands. Within weeks, the family realized they were living inside what paranormal experts would later describe as one of the most intense cases of poltergeist activity ever recorded in Colorado. It began one evening in early spring. The family had just finished dinner when they heard a sudden crash from the kitchen. Rushing in, they found a set of plates shattered on the floor, though no one had been near them. At first, they blamed vibrations from nearby construction, or perhaps an unstable shelf. But the following night, more dishes flew from their racks, landing several feet away. The family's teenage son swore he saw a plate lift itself off the counter before hurling across the room. The activity grew more erratic as days passed. Cupboards would swing open in the middle of the night. Lights flickered violently before bulbs exploded. Doors slammed shut hard enough to shake the walls, even when every window was closed. The family's dog refused to enter certain rooms, growling at empty corners and whining as if sensing something they could not see. In an attempt to document what was happening, the family installed security cameras around the house. What the footage revealed left them stunned: books flying off shelves, doors opening and slamming on their own, and small objects like pens and remote controls sliding across tables. In one chilling clip, a heavy bookshelf in the living room tilted forward, paused midair as if held by invisible hands, then crashed to the ground. The force of the impact shattered the glass of nearby picture frames, yet there was no one in sight. Fear soon replaced confusion. Sleep became impossible as banging sounds echoed through the house at all hours. Sometimes the noises seemed to come from inside the walls, other times from directly overhead. The family described a constant feeling of being watched, a pressure in the air that grew heavier whenever activity began. Cold spots appeared in random locations, the temperature dropping more than 20 degrees without explanation. Local electricians and contractors were brought in to inspect the wiring and structural integrity of the house. They found nothing abnormal. The electrical system was sound, the foundation stable. There were no leaks, no loose boards, and no signs of rodents or vibrations that could account for the movement of heavy objects. As the disturbances worsened, the family reached out to a Denver-based paranormal investigation group known for handling extreme hauntings. The team arrived equipped with electromagnetic field detectors, motion sensors, and thermal cameras. From the moment they entered, their equipment began to behave erratically. EMF meters spiked without any electrical devices nearby, and batteries drained within minutes. The investigators set up a base in the living room, the apparent center of the activity. Almost immediately, they heard knocking sounds, 3 distinct raps on the wall, followed by 2 more, as though responding to their questions. When asked who or what was there, one of the recorders picked up a faint voice on playback, a low whisper saying, "Get out." Throughout the night, their cameras captured multiple instances of movement, A small decorative vase slid slowly across a shelf before tumbling to the floor. A chair in the dining room turned by itself, its legs scraping audibly against the wood. On one thermal recording, a sudden burst of cold energy appeared, a defined, human-shaped mass standing near the doorway for several seconds before disappearing completely. Historical research revealed that the property had been built in the 1940s on land that once bordered a small cemetery. During city expansion decades earlier, some graves were relocated, but records suggested that not all remains had been properly transferred. Whether coincidence or not, the area had long been rumored by locals to harbor strange energy. Some neighbors even admitted they had heard odd noises at night, but never spoke up until after the family's story broke. As the investigation continued, the poltergeist activity became even more aggressive. One night, while the team and family were gathered in the kitchen reviewing footage, a cupboard door swung open with such force it struck the wall, leaving a dent. Seconds later, a stack of plates launched from the counter, crashing into the opposite wall. The event was captured on 3 cameras simultaneously, confirming that no one had touched them. The sound was deafening, a violent release of unseen energy that left everyone shaken. In another terrifying incident, the family's daughter was nearly struck when a picture frame shot off the wall and shattered at her feet. She described feeling a sudden gust of cold air and hearing what sounded like a growl just before it happened. After that, she refused to sleep in her room, choosing instead to stay with friends until the situation could be resolved. The investigators concluded that the activity displayed all classic signs of a poltergeist, a phenomenon believed to be caused by intense emotional energy, often centered around a person, particularly adolescents. In this case, they theorized that the teenage son might unknowingly be the focus of the disturbances, his emotional state somehow fueling the strange energy. However, this explanation did little to comfort the family. Whether the source was psychological or supernatural, the events were undeniably real. Eventually, a local spiritual advisor was brought in to perform a cleansing ritual. Using sage, prayers, and holy water, she moved through each room, calling for peace and rest for whatever force lingered there. During the ceremony, witnesses reported hearing faint whispers and feeling sudden drops in temperature, followed by an overwhelming stillness as the final words were spoken. For the first time in weeks, the house fell silent. In the days that followed, the disturbances ceased. No more objects flew, no lights flickered, and the air felt lighter. The family cautiously began returning to their routines, though they admitted they still felt uneasy, never quite sure if the peace would last. Even now, years later, they refuse to watch the old security footage, saying that reliving those moments feels like inviting the energy back. Neighbors still talk about the Denver poltergeist case, a haunting marked not by ghostly apparitions or whispers, but by raw, physical force. Whether born of restless spirits, emotional energy, or something science has yet to understand, the invisible power that once filled that house left behind a story that continues to haunt the city. As paranormal history, a chilling reminder that sometimes the unseen can move the world around us. In the heart of San Francisco, where steep streets and pastel-colored Victorian homes overlook the fog-draped bay, one house stands apart for reasons no blueprint could explain. It's a beautifully preserved Victorian-era residence in the city's Pacific Heights district, elegant on the outside, but infamous within. Locals call it the house with whispering walls, and the family who lives there will tell you that its beauty hides something unseen, something that speaks softly from the very bones of the house itself. The story began shortly after the Parker family moved into the property, a towering 3-story Victorian built in 1893. They had spent months restoring it, repainting walls, refinishing floors, and bringing back the home's original charm. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But then, late one night, Claire Parker, the homeowner, awoke to what she thought was someone whispering outside her bedroom door. The voice was faint, almost like the sound of a distant conversation. But when she opened the door, the hallway was empty. She dismissed it as her imagination, perhaps the house settling or the wind whistling through the old woodwork. But the whispers returned the next night, clearer this time, more distinct. They seemed to come not from outside the room, but from within the walls themselves. She could make out fragments of words, even what sounded like a name, Evelyn. Over the following weeks, the rest of the family began hearing it too. Sometimes it was a man's voice, sometimes a woman's, both speaking in hushed tones. The sounds would drift through the hallways, soft enough to seem unreal, but loud enough to freeze anyone who heard them. The whispers came most often late at night, just after midnight, when the fog rolled in and the city outside fell silent. The family soon realized that the whispers followed no pattern. Sometimes they would come from behind the walls of the parlor, other times from the kitchen, or even along the staircase. At times it seemed as though the house itself was breathing, creaks and murmurs, forming words that vanished as quickly as they came. One evening, their teenage son placed his ear against the wall, certain he'd hear nothing. Instead, he jumped back in shock as a faint voice whispered his own name, convinced something unusual was happening. The Parkers installed audio recorders in several rooms. The recordings, when played back, sent chills down their spines. Beneath the ambient hum of the house were distinct voices. A woman repeating names softly, sometimes humming, sometimes weeping. A man's low murmur, unintelligible but rhythmic, like reciting a prayer. Most disturbing of all was a recurring sound near the baseboards, a whispering chorus, repeating the same few words over and over. We remember. News of the strange activity soon reached a local team of paranormal investigators from San Francisco's Bay Area Paranormal Research Society. When they arrived, they were immediately struck by the house's atmosphere. The air felt colder in some rooms, especially near the original plaster walls that hadn't been replaced during renovation. Instruments registered sudden temperature drops. An electromagnetic field detector spiked intermittently without any electrical source nearby. The investigators conducted a series of controlled recordings using high-sensitivity microphones and digital EVP equipment. The results were startling. On playback, the devices captured several clear phrases, including one that repeated the name Evelyn Parker, a name the homeowners had never mentioned aloud during the session. The lead investigator asked the spirit to identify itself. The reply, faint but clear, came moments later. "We live here still." Curious about the name Evelyn, the Parkers began researching the house's history. They discovered that the property had once belonged to a family named Whitmore, who lived there from 1894 until the early 1920s. According to old records, Evelyn Whitmore, the youngest daughter, had died tragically in the home at the age of 16 after a sudden illness. Her parents reportedly never recovered from the loss, and soon after her death, the family moved away, leaving much of their belongings behind. This revelation cast a haunting shadow over the whispers. Could the voices be remnants of the Whitmores, trapped in time? The investigators thought it possible. They theorized that the old plaster walls, made with lime and horsehair, might have absorbed sound in a way that occasionally released fragments of those long-past voices, a phenomenon known as stone tape theory. According to this idea, intense emotional events can imprint themselves on the physical structure of a building, replaying like echoes when the conditions are right. Yet, not all explanations were so benign. During one investigation, a member of the team standing in the upstairs hallway reported feeling a cold hand brush against her shoulder. Another described hearing a whisper directly in her ear, a woman's voice saying, "Please don't leave me." Later, a sudden gust of icy air swept through the hall, though every window was closed. Over the following weeks, activity intensified. The whispers grew louder and more frequent, sometimes overlapping, as if several voices were speaking at once. On one night, Claire recorded an entire minute of hushed conversation coming from the living room wall. When she played it back, the voices seemed to repeat fragments of past events: laughter, a child's cry, and then a soft plea, "Don't forget me." Despite the haunting atmosphere, there was a strange sense of sorrow rather than malice. The family began to view the whispers as a reflection of history, as if the house were remembering the people who once called it home. Still, the experience left them uneasy. Visitors often commented on the strange acoustics. how the walls seemed to breathe, or how sound carried oddly from one room to another. Some claimed they heard faint voices calling their names, even when they were alone. To this day, recordings from the Parker home remain among the most compelling paranormal evidence in San Francisco. Audio experts who analyzed the files confirmed that the voices were genuine and not artifacts of background noise or manipulation. The words, though faint, were clear enough to recognize multiple speakers, male, female, and even what sounded like a child. Whether it's the result of trapped energy, residual sound, or spirits longing to be heard, the whispering walls of this Victorian home continue to intrigue and unsettle all who visit. The Parkers still live there, having grown accustomed to the sounds that drift through the night. Sometimes, they even greet the voices softly before bed, hoping to ease whatever restless energy lingers. On quiet, foggy nights, when the wind sweeps through San Francisco's narrow streets and the world feels suspended in time, passers-by claim they can still hear faint murmurs from within the house, whispers that rise and fade like a sigh, carrying names from another century. The walls, it seems, still have stories to tell, and they speak in the only way they can, softly, endlessly, to those willing to listen. In a quiet Seattle neighborhood, nestled among towering evergreens and misty hills, stood a two-story craftsman home built in the early 1900s. Its aged wood creaked softly in the damp Pacific air, and its large windows looked out over the fog that often rolled in from Puget Sound. For years, the house had been admired for its old-world charm, until one night, it became the site of a mystery that still has no rational explanation. The homeowner, a software engineer named Thomas Reed, had lived there for only 6 months before the first incident occurred. It was just after midnight when he heard the sound of footsteps echoing from the second floor. At first, he assumed his wife, Julia, had gotten up for a glass of water, but when he checked, she was still sound asleep beside him. The footsteps continued slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth across the upper hallway until they abruptly stopped. Thomas climbed the staircase, his phone flashlight slicing through the dim glow from the street lamps outside. The old floorboards groaned beneath his feet, but the hallway was empty. The air felt oddly heavy, and a faint chill lingered as though someone had just passed by. He searched every room, the guest bedroom, the study, the attic door, yet found nothing out of place. Shaking it off, he returned to bed, convincing himself it was the house settling. But the sounds didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, the footsteps grew more distinct. Sometimes they started in the hallway and ended abruptly near the master bedroom door. Other times, they circled the upstairs landing for minutes at a time, as if an unseen presence were pacing in thought. Julia heard them too, enough to record the sounds one night on her phone. When they played it back the next morning, the audio revealed something unsettling: a series of clear, rhythmic steps, followed by what sounded like a soft sigh. The couple decided to install motion-sensitive cameras throughout the house. For several nights, nothing happened. Then, one cold February evening, the cameras captured something extraordinary. The footage showed the floorboards in the upstairs hallway bending slightly, as though under the weight of unseen feet. The sound of footsteps was clearly audible, but there was no visible figure, just the boards flexing, shifting, and then freezing still when Thomas called out from below. By now, curiosity had replaced fear. The Reeds began researching the home's history and discovered it had belonged to a shipbuilder named Andrew Callahan in the early 1900s, according to archived city records. Callahan had lost his wife and son in a boating accident on Lake Union. Locals once whispered that he spent his final years pacing the upper floors of the house at night, calling their names. When he died, the property sat empty for nearly a decade before being sold. The Reeds reached out to a local paranormal investigation team from Tacoma. On a fog-drenched evening, the investigators arrived with thermal cameras, EMF meters, and audio recorders. Almost immediately, the temperature in the upstairs hallway dropped 10 degrees, though every window was sealed. One investigator, standing near the old study, reported hearing a faint tapping sound that grew louder until it became distinct footsteps again, moving slowly in a tight loop. Their equipment confirmed fluctuations in electromagnetic fields right where the footsteps seemed to occur. When they played back the EVP recordings, a faint voice whispered something that sounded like home or alone. Julia burst into tears. She said it sounded like a man's voice, soft, weary, and lost. The following nights grew stranger. The footsteps became louder whenever someone tried to speak about them. Books occasionally shifted positions on the shelves, and the family cat refused to go upstairs altogether. One night, Thomas followed the sound to the upper landing. As he stepped forward, the noise stopped completely. The silence was so absolute that it felt oppressive. Then, without warning, one final creak echoed directly behind him. He turned, but no one was there. Word of the haunting spread among friends and neighbors, some of whom admitted they had seen lights flicker in the upstairs windows when the house was empty. One neighbor claimed to hear muffled walking sounds coming from the home late at night, though the Reeds were out of town. Months later, the couple invited the same investigators back for a final study. This time, they brought advanced motion tracking sensors. Once again, the upstairs hallway became the center of activity. The sensors registered faint movement, roughly human-sized, pacing the corridor. Every few minutes, it paused near the fireplace in the study, as though remembering something. When one of the team members asked, "Are you looking for someone?" the EMF meter spiked. A moment later, the faint sound of footsteps resumed, retreating toward the end of the hall before fading entirely. The Reeds eventually decided to move, not because of fear, but because of exhaustion, the sleepless nights, the constant unease, and the lingering sense that they were sharing their home with someone who could never leave. Before they packed up, Thomas left a note on the upstairs mantel. "You are not forgotten. Rest easy." The new homeowners were informed of the property's history, but decided to move in anyway. Within weeks, they too reported hearing footsteps upstairs when no one was there. Their security system even captured the same phenomenon. Floorboards shifting beneath invisible weight, then going still as soon as someone entered the room. To this day, the Seattle home stands as quietly as it always has. By daylight, it looks perfectly ordinary. Sunlight spilling across polished wood floors and antique fixtures. But those who have been inside after dark know differently. In the stillness of night, when the fog curls low over the city and the streets fall silent, the sound of phantom footsteps can sometimes be heard drifting from the upper floors. Whether it's the lingering spirit of Andrew Callahan or simply an echo of grief imprinted on the walls, no one can say for certain. What remains undeniable is that something unseen still walks that hallway, pacing endlessly through time, searching for peace that never came, and leaving behind the chilling rhythm of steps that stop only when you listen too closely. In a quiet suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, a homeowner named Laura Jenkins experienced something that would shake her sense of reality. The incident began on a warm evening when she entered her bathroom after a shower, the air thick with steam. As she wiped the mirror clean with a towel, she saw movement just behind her shoulder. Startled, she turned quickly, expecting to see her husband or one of her children, but the bathroom was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, a dark, human-shaped shadow glided across the reflection and vanished into the fogged glass. At first, Laura dismissed it as a trick of the light or fatigue from a long day. But the image had been too defined, too deliberate. The shape wasn't her on it, was taller, broader, and moved independently of her reflection. Over the following days, the strange occurrences multiplied. Each morning, the mirror would fog over, but instead of a smooth mist, faint handprints appeared too small to belong to anyone in the household. At night, Laura and her husband, Mark, began hearing soft tapping sounds coming from the bathroom, even when no one was inside. One evening, Laura decided to record what was happening. She set her phone on the counter, pointed at the mirror, and left the bathroom dark except for the hallway light spilling through the door. When she reviewed the footage later, she was horrified. A dark, human-shaped silhouette drifted across the reflection. It didn't walk or fade. Naturally it glided, smooth and silent, before disappearing into the corner of the frame. What made it worse was that the silhouette appeared behind her reflection at one point, as though it was standing directly behind her even though she hadn't been in the room At the time of recording, the family tried to rationalize it. They considered the possibility of reflections from passing cars, shadows from outside, or even light distortions caused by humidity. But none of these explanations held up. The windows in the bathroom faced a high privacy wall, and there was no source of moving light that could produce such a figure. Mark, once skeptical, began experiencing the phenomena himself. He would step out of the shower and see another shape in the mirror beside him, a faint outline that vanished when he turned. Soon, the activity extended beyond the bathroom. Mirrors in the hallway and bedroom began fogging on their own, even when the air was cool and dry. Sometimes, faint outlines of faces appeared in the mist, distorted, expressionless, and staring outward. On one occasion, Laura captured a photograph of the hallway mirror during one of these events. A faint face appeared beside her, reflection, hollow eyes, and a blurred mouth just visible enough to chill her blood. Disturbed, the Jenkins family contacted a local paranormal research group based in Phoenix. The investigators arrived with cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and infrared equipment. From the moment they began setting up, the atmosphere in the bathroom felt heavy, the air noticeably colder than the rest of the house. During their session, one investigator asked aloud, "Who are you? Why are you here?" In response, a faint tapping echoed through the mirror, 3 slow knocks. Moments later, one of the cameras captured a shadow passing across the reflective surface, though no one stood in front of it. When the footage was reviewed later, the figure appeared again, its movement deliberate, as if pacing behind the glass. Further research into the property revealed that the house had been built over the site of an older home that had burned down in the 1960s. Records indicated that a man had died in that fire, trapped in the bathroom when the structure collapsed. Investigators speculated that the entity might be connected to this tragedy, a residual or intelligent presence, bound to the reflective surfaces that had somehow held traces of his final moments. Over the following weeks, the Jenkins family noticed a pattern. The activity intensified whenever mirrors were cleaned or replaced. A new mirror would remain normal for a few days before fogging up and revealing faint smudges or the occasional shadow. The connection seemed undeniable. One night, as Laura brushed her teeth, she felt a sudden chill. The mirror began to fog slowly, and in the mist, a shape formed, a dark figure standing directly behind her. She froze, unable to move. The figure didn't stay long. It tilted its head slightly, almost as if studying her, before fading away. In its wake, faint letters appeared on the mirror's surface, written in the condensation. "I'm still here." Terrified, but unwilling to abandon her home, Laura covered the bathroom mirror with a towel and left it that way for weeks. Strangely, during that time, all paranormal activity stopped. The tapping, the shadows, and the whispers ceased entirely. When she finally removed the cover, the mirror remained fog-free, but the sense of being watched lingered. To this day, the Jenkins family keeps the lights bright in that bathroom and avoids looking too long into the glass after dark. Visitors sometimes comment that the mirror feels strange, as though the reflection doesn't move quite right, or the light bends oddly around its surface. Whether it's imagination, residual energy, or something bound within the glass, one truth remains: in that Phoenix home, mirrors are no longer just reflections. They're windows into something unseen, something that once looked back. In a quiet Atlanta suburb, the Johnson family's peaceful life was abruptly disturbed by events that defied explanation. They had recently moved into a charming, early 20th century home with wide bay windows, original hardwood floors, and a sense of history that drew them in. At first, the house seemed perfect, full of character and warmth, but soon, strange occurrences began to unsettle them, starting with subtle noises and gradually escalating into something far more unnerving. It started one late evening when Cynthia Johnson, the mother, was reviewing security footage from their living room camera. The video had been installed mainly for peace of mind, to check on deliveries and keep an eye on the children while they slept. What she saw, however, was anything but ordinary. A translucent figure appeared, walking slowly through the living room wall. Its form was human, though faint, almost like mist shaped into a person. It moved deliberately, gliding across the floor and passing through the wall without resistance. Cynthia's hands shook as she replayed the footage again and again, unable to believe what she was seeing. When she showed the video to her husband, Marcus, he initially dismissed it as a camera glitch or a trick of the lighting, but over the following nights, the occurrences multiplied. The family began hearing whispers when no one was home. Sometimes, the voices were indecipherable, a low murmur drifting through empty rooms. Other times, the whispers seemed to call their names softly, almost pleadingly, echoing through the hallways and corners of the house. The activity did not remain confined to sounds. Doors would move on their own, opening or closing slowly, as if guided by invisible hands. Drawers slid open in the kitchen without explanation, and lights flickered at random intervals. The family noticed a sudden drop in temperature in certain areas, especially near the living room wall, where the ghostly figure had appeared on camera. Even the family dog seemed uneasy, growling at nothing and refusing to enter specific rooms. In an effort to understand what was happening, the Johnsons contacted a local paranormal investigation team. The investigators arrived with cameras, thermal imaging equipment, and electromagnetic field meters, prepared to examine the house thoroughly. From the moment they stepped inside, they noted an odd heaviness in the air, a pressure that seemed to settle around the living room and hallway. The temperature fluctuated sharply, and several EMF meters registered sudden spikes with no electrical devices nearby. The team began reviewing footage from the family's security cameras alongside their own recordings. On multiple occasions, the transparent figure appeared, always moving with a calm, deliberate gait. Sometimes it paused near the furniture, lingering as though observing the room, and then vanished into thin air. On audio playback, faint whispers and soft sighs could be heard, corroborating the family's experiences. One investigator described the presence as aware, responding subtly to the actions of anyone in the room. Research into the home's history revealed that the house had been built in 1912 and had a long lineage of previous occupants. Records indicated that a woman named Lillian Carrington had lived in the home during the 1920s. She had died unexpectedly in her early 40s, alone in the very living room where the figure was now appearing. Some neighbors remembered stories passed down through generations about mysterious happenings in the house, though no one had lived there long enough to witness them firsthand. Until the Johnsons moved in, the investigators theorized that the ghostly figure could be Lillian's spirit, lingering in the house for reasons unknown. Its appearance and behavior suggested it was a residual haunting, replaying fragments of her life and death. But some of the interactions, the whispers, the doors moving when people were present, hinted at intelligent activity. It was as if the spirit had awareness, reacting to the presence of the living, yet remaining tethered to the space. The Johnsons began to document their own experiences, keeping a journal of times when doors moved, when cold touches brushed their skin, and when whispers called to them. Cynthia described feeling a hand lightly pressed against her shoulder during a late-night walk through the living room, though no one else was present. Marcus reported hearing his name spoken softly as he sat alone in the kitchen, and their teenage daughter claimed she saw a shadow flit across her bedroom doorway, disappearing as she turned to look. Despite the unsettling events, the family never felt threatened. The presence seemed mournful rather than malevolent, as if seeking acknowledgement or companionship. Yet, the emotional toll was significant. Sleep was disrupted, tension ran high during the day, and the constant awareness of being watched created a sense of unease that the family could not ignore. A spiritual advisor was eventually invited to perform a cleansing ritual, using sage, prayers, and protective symbols. The advisor walked through the house, focusing on the living room and hallways where the activity was strongest. During the ritual, the air seemed to shift, the temperature rose slightly, and a calm settled over the rooms. The faint whispers appeared one final time during the ceremony, soft and distant, as if the spirit was acknowledging the presence of outsiders before retreating. Since the cleansing, the ghostly figure has appeared less frequently. The security footage no longer shows it walking through the walls, though occasional cold drafts and faint whispers still occur. The Johnsons have learned to coexist with the remnants of the presence, acknowledging it as part of the house's history. They continue to live in the home, respecting the spirit's lingering presence while maintaining their daily lives. The Atlanta home remains a quiet enigma, a reminder that even in modern neighborhoods filled with technology and security, the past can leave its mark. The ghostly figure on camera serves as compelling evidence that some spirits cannot move on, bound instead to the places they once called home. For the Johnson family, the experience has been both terrifying and humbling. A daily reminder that the unseen world can exist just beyond our perception, quietly walking alongside us, waiting to be noticed. In a quiet Houston neighborhood, a historic brick home became the center of a series of inexplicable events that left its residents questioning reality. The Ramirez family had recently purchased a property, drawn by its classic architecture, high ceilings, and the charm of its well-tended garden. At first, life in the home seemed peaceful, with the family enjoying evenings in the cozy living room and weekends exploring the nearby parks. That sense of normalcy, however, was not destined to last. It began subtly. One evening, Maria Ramirez noticed a small vase on the dining room table had shifted slightly, though no one had been near it. She dismissed it as an accident, perhaps caused by the family dog brushing past the table. But the following night, the same vase toppled completely to the floor, shattering into pieces. Then, a set of silverware in the kitchen drawer moved, as if someone had been using it. The object slid across the counter and clattered to the tile floor. At first, the family tried to rationalize these occurrences, blaming uneven surfaces or drafts, but soon, the disturbances became too frequent and too deliberate to ignore. The most striking incidents occurred in the living room. Maria's husband, Alejandro, returned home one evening to find books scattered across the floor. They had fallen from the shelves in precise order, not randomly, almost as if someone had picked them up and arranged them before letting them go. The family dog, usually fearless, refused to enter the room, growling at empty corners and retreating to the stairs. Determined to understand what was happening, the Ramirezes installed several security cameras throughout the house. The footage they captured was both unsettling and undeniable. Vases slid across tables without any visible force. Books tumbled from shelves, and cutlery on the kitchen counter shifted as if pushed by invisible hands. One clip showed a stack of heavy porcelain dishes lifting slightly before sliding to the floor, narrowly missing a chair. On another recording, a silver teapot rocked forward on the edge of a countertop before tipping over with a soft crash, though no one had been near it. The movements were deliberate, controlled, and entirely without a human presence. The escalating activity prompted the family to seek professional help. A local paranormal investigation team arrived with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and audio recorders. From the moment they entered the house, they noticed an unusual heaviness in the air, a pressure that seemed to settle over the rooms where the activity was most frequent. EMF meters spiked near the dining table and living room shelves, and thermal cameras detected brief cold spots that could not be explained by drafts or air conditioning. Investigators observed that the movement of objects often seemed connected to emotional energy within the house. It occurred most frequently when the family was experiencing stress or tension. Arguments, moments of fear, or anxiety seemed to coincide with the object's activity. Alejandro and Maria reported feeling sudden pressure on their chests, as if invisible hands were pressing down, accompanied by the sensation of being watched. Research into the home's history revealed that it had been built in the 1940s and previously belonged to a man named Harold Whitman. Records indicated that Whitman had died alone in the house under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors recalled that he had been reclusive, prone to shouting at unseen entities and claiming that objects in the house moved on their own. Some suggested he had been haunted by poltergeist activity himself, and his death had left unresolved energy lingering within the home. The investigators theorized that the Ramirez house might be experiencing a similar type of phenomenon, a poltergeist, potentially tied to the residual energy of a former occupant. Poltergeists are often associated with intense emotional energy and sometimes attach themselves to a location or the people currently living there. In this case, it appeared that the house retained the echoes of Harold Whitman's unrest, manifesting as physical interactions with the environment. As the investigation continued, the team noted specific patterns in the activity. Objects tended to move more when the family was downstairs, suggesting the entity avoided direct observation. Heavy items, like vases and stacks of books, often slid or tipped slowly, as if to make a statement without causing serious harm. Silverware, teapots, and lighter objects were displaced more frequently, sometimes leaving trails across floors and counters. Occasionally, the movement seemed to respond to the family's presence, ceasing abruptly when someone entered a room. One night, Alejandro witnessed a particularly chilling event. While preparing dinner, he felt the distinct pressure of an unseen hand on his shoulder. Turning quickly, he saw a vase slide across the counter toward him, stopping just short of the edge. The moment was captured by one of the security cameras, showing the object gliding unnaturally, without any force. Both he and Maria described the sensation as a mix of fear and sorrow, an awareness that something unseen was present, yet not malevolent in the traditional sense. After several months, the family enlisted a spiritual advisor to perform a cleansing of the home. Using sage, prayers, and salt, the advisor moved through the areas of highest activity. During the ritual, the air in the house felt lighter. The pressure lifted, and the frequency of moving objects diminished significantly. Vases remained in place, books stayed on shelves, and the once restless silverware no longer slid across the counter. The presence, it seemed, had not vanished entirely, but its intensity had been reduced. Despite the calming effect of the cleansing, the Ramirez family remains cautious. They occasionally notice minor disturbances, a book slightly askew or a cold draft sweeping through a room, but nothing as pronounced as the earlier activity. The house now serves as both a home and a reminder of the invisible forces that can linger in places long after their original occupants are gone. The phenomenon of moving objects in the Ramirez house is a stark example of the poltergeist phenomenon. The ability of unseen energy to interact with the physical world, leaving residents both terrified and fascinated. Whether tied to the emotional residue of Harold Whitman or an independent spiritual force, the events demonstrate that some energies do not simply dissipate with time. In Houston, the Ramirez family's experience has become a point of interest for both neighbors and paranormal enthusiasts. The story serves as a reminder that even in a modern city, with technology and security systems, some things cannot be explained by science alone. In the quiet moments, when the house is still and shadows stretch across polished floors, it is easy to imagine the faint gliding of a vase, the slow tip of a book, or the silent presence of energy that refuses to be ignored. The Ramirez home is more than a residence. It is a living record of the unseen, a place where history, emotion, and mystery converge, leaving objects to move and whisper stories that only the observant can witness. In a quiet Minneapolis neighborhood, the Lawson family's home seemed like any other on the block, well-kept, inviting, and filled with the warmth of a growing family. The house had been in the family for a few years, and the Larsons loved its cozy living room, sunlit kitchen, and the familiar creak of the wooden floors. That comfort, however, was shattered one evening when they experienced something they could neither explain nor dismiss. It began on a chilly autumn night when Emily Larson, the mother, was reviewing photos from her phone. She often took snapshots of family gatherings, holidays, and casual moments, documenting the small joys of everyday life. That evening, she noticed something odd in a recent picture of the living room. Sitting on the sofa was a figure, a man-shaped silhouette, indistinct but unmistakably present. The figure appeared to be gazing forward, but its features were blurry, almost transparent, as though caught between dimensions. Shocked, Emily called her husband, Daniel, to look at the image. When they both approached the sofa, expecting to see someone who had perhaps slipped by unnoticed, the space was empty. The cushions showed no sign of disturbance, and nothing in the room suggested anyone had been there. Heart pounding, Daniel snapped another photo from the same angle, hoping to capture evidence. When he reviewed the new image, the figure had vanished entirely, leaving only the familiar sofa and scattered throw pillows. The couple was left with a chilling conclusion. The presence they had photographed was no ordinary visitor. Over the next few days, the Larson family began noticing other unusual activity. Footsteps echoed across the hardwood floors when no one was home, soft at first, then steadily pacing the living room and upstairs hallways. Emily described hearing faint laughter late at night, delicate and childlike, but no children lived in the house. Sometimes the sound seemed playful, almost teasing, as if the unseen presence was aware of their reactions. The family dog, usually calm, would growl at empty corners or refuse to enter certain rooms, adding to the growing unease. In an attempt to capture more evidence, the Larsons set up security cameras in the living room and hallway. On the first night, the footage revealed movement that defied explanation. Shadows shifted independently of the room's lighting, and at one point, a faint outline resembling the figure in the original photograph appeared near the sofa. The form lingered briefly, then dissipated as if melting into thin air. Other clips recorded the faint sound of footsteps and muffled laughter, even during times when the house was confirmed empty. The family soon sought help from local paranormal investigators. The team arrived equipped with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field meters, and audio recorders, hoping to document the unusual activity. From the moment they stepped into the living room, they felt the air grow colder, a sudden chill settling over the space. The EMF meters spiked in areas corresponding to where the figure had been photographed, and thermal cameras captured brief anomalies, ghostly, wavering outlines that appeared and disappeared without warning. Investigators also conducted audio sessions to capture potential electronic voice phenomena. During playback, they detected faint whispers and laughter, voices distinct yet distant, echoing through empty rooms. One EVP seemed to repeat a single phrase, "I'm still here." The message was brief but haunting, reinforcing the idea that the home was occupied by a presence tied to its history. Curious about the origin of the figure, the team researched the house's past. They discovered that the property had been built in the 1920s and had a series of former residents, including a man named Charles Whitaker, who lived alone in the home for many years. Neighbors recalled seeing him through the windows late at night, often sitting quietly on the living room sofa, staring forward as if in deep contemplation. Charles had passed away suddenly in the house, and some suggested that he had left a residual imprint of himself, a memory, a presence that lingered long after his death. The investigators suggested that the disappearing figure might be a residual haunting, a phenomenon where intense emotional or habitual energy imprints itself on a location. The footsteps and laughter, however, indicated possible intelligent activity, as if the spirit was aware of the current occupants and occasionally interacted with them. The combination of residual energy and interactive phenomena created an unsettling but compelling haunting. As the months went on, the Larson family adapted to the presence, learning to coexist with the occasional disturbances. They noticed that the figures seemed to appear most frequently in the evenings and nights, often when the household was quiet. Though initially terrifying, the activity gradually became less intimidating and more like a ghostly companion, a reminder of the house's history and the people who had lived there before them. Emily occasionally spoke to the figure aloud, leaving chairs and cushions arranged in a way that seemed welcoming, hoping to ease whatever unrest lingered. Daniel, while more skeptical, admitted he had grown accustomed to hearing faint footsteps or laughter without seeing a source. The family dog, once anxious, slowly adapted as well, often ignoring minor disturbances after recognizing they caused no harm. Photographs of the living room continued to occasionally capture faint figures, always vanishing when reviewed, a phenomenon that left the Larsons both awed and unsettled. Each image served as a reminder that some presence persisted beyond the boundaries of ordinary perception. For the family, the house had become more than just a home. It was a space where history and the present converged, and where the unseen could reveal itself in fleeting, inexplicable ways. To this day, the Minneapolis home stands as a quiet testament to the lingering influence of those who once walked its floors. Visitors are often told of the disappearing figure and the faint sounds that drift through the living room at night. Though the Lawson family lives with occasional fear, they also feel a profound connection to the home's past. In the stillness of the evening, when the city is silent and the house seems suspended in time, it is possible to hear the faintest echo of footsteps and the softest hint of laughter. A ghostly presence captured in a photograph, yet impossible to hold, forever reminding those who live there that some spirits remain unseen but undeniably near. In a quiet residential neighborhood of Philadelphia, the Thompson family moved into a charming row house that had been standing since the early 1900s. The house was warm and inviting, with its original hardwood floors, high ceilings, and large windows, letting in the soft glow of morning sun. For the first few weeks, life in the home seemed ordinary, filled with the typical hustle and bustle of family life. But soon, the Thompsons began experiencing something that would defy explanation: the presence of a dog that didn't exist. The first signs appeared on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Mary Thompson, the mother, was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard the unmistakable sound of nails clicking on the hardwood floor. A rhythmic patter that grew louder and faster, as though a dog were running excitedly down the hallway. She called out to her children, expecting to see a neighbor's pet, or perhaps a stray, that had wandered inside. But when she stepped into the hallway, it was empty. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving only the faint echo of footsteps fading into silence. At first, the family assumed it was a trick of the old floors, or perhaps an unusual creaking pattern. But the next day, the sounds returned, this time accompanied by barking. The barks were sharp, distinct, and unmistakably canine. The children insisted they had seen a dark-shaped dart across the hallway. But when their parents investigated, nothing was there. Over the following nights, the activity intensified. The barking grew louder. Furniture appeared slightly shifted, as if nudged aside, and occasional scratches sounded along the walls and doors. To document the phenomena, the Thompsons installed security cameras throughout the house. One evening, while reviewing the footage, they captured something extraordinary: a shadowy, dog-like figure moving along the hallway, pausing briefly as though sniffing the air, before disappearing around the corner. The form was dark and indistinct, almost translucent, yet its movements were deliberate, unmistakably canine. Mary and her husband, David, watched the footage repeatedly, unable to rationalize what they were seeing. There were no pets in the house, no animals could have entered, and the doors and windows were securely locked. Disturbed and curious, the Thompsons contacted a local paranormal investigation team. The investigators arrived with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and audio recording equipment, prepared to examine the house thoroughly. From the moment they entered, they noticed a subtle chill in the air, particularly in the hallway where the shadow dog had appeared. EMF meters registered unusual spikes, and thermal imaging occasionally revealed fleeting heat signatures corresponding to the path of the phantom canine. During the investigation, the team also recorded audio. On playback, the barking and scratching sounds were clearly audible, even in rooms where no one was present. Occasionally, they captured the sound of footsteps running across the floors, stopping abruptly as if the dog had sensed the investigators' presence. The phenomenon seemed selective, appearing only at certain times, almost as though the entity was aware of the people in the house. Research into the home's history revealed that it had once belonged to an elderly woman named Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, who had lived there for decades until her passing. According to neighbors, she had a beloved German shepherd named Max, who had been her constant companion. After her death, the dog was reported to have died shortly thereafter, and the house remained vacant for several years before the Thompsons purchased it. Paranormal experts suggested that the ghostly activity could be linked to Max, whose loyalty and presence may have imprinted itself onto the home. The investigators proposed that this could be a form of residual haunting, in which strong emotional energy from a beloved pet persisted after death, manifesting as a shadow or spectral figure. The footsteps, barking, and occasional nudging of objects indicated a presence that was active but not threatening. Over time, the Thompson family grew accustomed to their unusual companion. They reported that the phantom dog seemed particularly active during the evenings, often when the house was quiet. Their children would sometimes laugh at the sounds of playful barking or the fleeting shadows moving past walls and doors. Occasionally, furniture that had been slightly moved would be returned to its original place the next morning, as though the dog had been tidying after itself in its own spectral way. Despite the eerie nature of the experiences, the presence of the phantom dog also provided a strange comfort. Mary described feeling reassured by the sounds of Max's barking, believing that the spirit was protective rather than harmful. David noted that the house seemed warmer, livelier, and more alive with the canine activity. Even if it was of a supernatural origin, the family learned to live with the phenomena, acknowledging Max's presence without fear, respecting the loyalty and bond that had somehow endured beyond death. In the months following the investigations, the Thompson family continued to capture fleeting glimpses of the shadow dog on cameras and hear barking echoing down the halls. Neighbors occasionally asked about the activity, sharing stories they had heard about Mrs. Whitman and her loyal companion. The phenomenon became a unique aspect of the home, blending history, emotion, and mystery into a daily experience that reminded the Thompsons that some bonds are too strong to end, even with death. The phantom dog of the Philadelphia house serves as a haunting reminder that spirits do not always take human form. Max's presence, captured in shadows and echoes, continues to roam the hallways, a faithful guardian and playful companion to a family that did not ask for it but has come to accept it. In the quiet of the night, when the house is still and the streetlights cast long shadows across the floor, the sound of a dog running, barking, or nudging at the furniture serves as proof that loyalty can endure beyond the limits of life, itself leaving behind a presence that is felt seen and forever remembered. In a quiet neighborhood of Detroit, Michigan, the Callahan family moved into an older two-story home, charmed by its classic architecture and spacious interior. The brick exterior, tall windows, and original hardwood floors made the house feel inviting. Yet the family would soon discover that beneath its familiar facade lay something entirely unexplainable. What started as minor disturbances soon escalated into events that left the household shaken and terrified. The first signs were subtle. Lisa Callahan, the mother, noticed a cold draft in the living room one evening, despite all the windows being closed. She dismissed it as a quirk of the old house, or a slight chill from the central heating system. Later, while arranging books on a shelf, she felt a light tap against her shoulder, as if a small hand had brushed her. Turning quickly, she saw nothing. Later that night, her husband, Tom, heard a whisper, faint but urgent, near the staircase. At first, he assumed it was one of the children, yet the house was silent and empty. Within a few days, the disturbances became more pronounced. Objects would move without explanation, picture frames shifted slightly, books slid from shelves, and small items fell off tables as if nudged by unseen hands. On several occasions, dishes in the kitchen would slide across the counters, landing safely on the floor but creating sudden loud crashes that startled the family. These events seemed deliberate, almost as though an invisible presence wanted to make its presence known. The most disturbing incidents were the whispers. Late at night, Lisa and Tom began hearing soft, urgent voices, repeating the same chilling phrase, "Get out." The whispers were always low, almost on the edge of perception, yet unmistakable in their insistence. Sometimes, the phrase was repeated multiple times in quick succession, accompanied by a sense of pressure in the air, as though the house itself had grown heavier with warning. The children, initially unafraid, began to report seeing shadowy figures lurking in corners or near doorways, vanishing when anyone approached. Feeling increasingly uneasy, the Callahans installed security cameras and audio recorders throughout the house. Reviewing the footage, they were shocked to discover objects moving on their own small knickknacks, sliding off shelves, light fixtures swinging slightly, and the faint outline of a shadow drifting across the hallway. Audio recordings captured the whispers clearly, repeating the same dire message over and over, "Get out." There was no explanation for the sounds, no drafts or mechanical issues that could account for them. The family sought the help of a local paranormal investigation team. The team arrived with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field meters, and digital audio devices. From the moment they entered, the investigators sensed an unusual heaviness in the house, particularly in the living room and upstairs hallway. EMF meters spiked in certain areas, while thermal imaging revealed intermittent cold spots that seemed to move through the rooms independently of air circulation. The investigators also recorded audio that confirmed the family's experience as soft whispers, repeating phrases of warning, punctuated by faint sounds of objects sliding or tapping against surfaces. Research into the home's history revealed that the house had been built in the 1920s and had seen a series of tenants over the decades. One of the previous residents had tragically died in the home, reportedly in an accident involving a gas leak. Neighbors recalled that in the months following the incident, the house had been left vacant due to claims of strange occurrences, lights flickering on and off, unexplained cold drafts, and neighbors hearing noises that resembled footsteps or voices. Paranormal experts theorized that the energy of that tragic event could have left a residual imprint, one that now seemed to manifest as warnings to those currently living in the home. The investigators noted that the disturbances appeared particularly active at night, often coinciding with periods of emotional tension or stress within the household. Objects would move more frequently when the family was awake and alone, and whispers intensified in quiet moments. Shadow figures were most often observed in peripheral vision, fleeting and difficult to capture on camera, but they left a lasting impression on those who saw them. Despite the fear, the Callahans continued living in the home, taking precautions to coexist with the activity. They began leaving spaces tidy and organized, attempting to reduce what they believed might be triggers for the disturbances. Candles and small ritual offerings were placed in corners, and family members spoke aloud when moving through the house at night, acknowledging the presence with respect. Over time, these measures seemed to lessen the intensity of the activity, though the whispers never fully ceased. Visitors occasionally commented on the strange energy of the house. Some felt a chill as soon as they entered, while others reported seeing shadows at the edges of their vision or hearing faint murmurs. The Callahans warned guests about the activity, particularly the repeated message, "Get out." Even with these precautions, the sense of being watched and the occasional movement of objects reminded everyone that the house held more than just history within its walls. The whispered warnings phenomenon in the Callahan home serves as a stark reminder that some energies linger, tethered to events long past. The repeated phrase, "Get out," carries an urgency that is impossible to ignore, suggesting a protective or cautionary force rather than a malicious one. For the Callahans, the home is now a place where the unseen is part of daily life, a mixture of fear, fascination, and respect for a presence that refuses to remain hidden. In Detroit, this house stands as a testament to the persistence of residual energy and the mysterious ways it can manifest. Whispers echo through the hallways, objects shift without explanation, and shadowy figures flit at the edges of perception, reminding those who live there that some warnings are not meant to be ignored. For the Callahans, the home is both sanctuary and enigma, a place where history, tragedy, and the supernatural converge, leaving behind an ever-present message, "Get out." In a historic row house in Baltimore, Maryland, the Henderson family experienced an unsettling phenomenon that would leave them questioning the boundaries between the living and the dead. The house, built in the late 1800s, had long been a charming yet quiet residence. Its brick facade and tall windows reflecting the city's rich history, the Hendersons were drawn to the home for its character and location, unaware that they were moving into a space that had borne witness to decades of private sorrow. The first unusual incident occurred on a cool spring night. Margaret Henderson, the mother, was woken by the soft, unmistakable sound of a woman crying. The sobs were muffled yet achingly clear, echoing through the hallways of the otherwise silent house. She initially thought it might have been a neighbor, but the sound seemed to come from inside her own home. Margaret rose from bed, her heart pounding, and followed the sound into the living room, only to find the space empty. The crying ceased abruptly as she stepped forward, leaving only a lingering chill in the air. In the following days, the family noticed more disturbances. Doors would open and close by themselves, sometimes slowly, sometimes with sudden force. Cabinet doors creaked without explanation, and small objects occasionally shifted positions or fell to the floor. At first, the Hendersons assumed these occurrences were the result of settling floors or drafty windows typical of older homes. However, the frequency and timing of the events, often occurring late at night, suggested something more deliberate. Seeking clarity, the family set up cameras throughout the house. During one late-night recording, the footage captured a door slowly swinging open and then closing, though no one had entered or exited the room. Moments later, the camera picked up a faint, shimmering figure near the doorway, an indistinct, yet unmistakably human in shape. At the same time, an audio recording captured the sound of quiet crying, the sobs heavy with emotion, echoing through the hallway. The family watched in disbelief, realizing that what they were witnessing was not a trick of the imagination. Disturbed, they contacted a local paranormal investigation team. Investigators arrived equipped with EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and audio recorders, hoping to document the activity and understand the source of the disturbances. From the moment they stepped inside, they reported an oppressive feeling of sorrow in the air, particularly near the living room and upstairs bedrooms. Cold spots were recorded, appearing sporadically but consistently in areas where doors moved or where the crying was most audible. During an audio session, the investigators asked questions aloud in an attempt to communicate with the presence. The response came almost immediately. A faint, heart-wrenching sob echoed through the rooms, followed by a whisper of a name that could barely be discerned. Thermal cameras captured brief flickers of a figure in the hallway, seeming to drift from room to room. EMF readings spiked at various intervals, indicating a concentration of energy moving through the house in patterns inconsistent with normal electrical fluctuations. Research into the home, as history revealed that the previous occupants had included a woman who had lost a young daughter decades earlier. The tragedy had left a lasting mark on the property. Neighbors recalled hearing stories of grief that lingered long after the family had moved away. Investigators theorized that the crying might be a residual haunting, a manifestation of sorrow so intense that it left an imprint on the house. Unlike malevolent spirits, this presence appeared to mourn rather than to threaten, though its expressions of grief could be deeply unsettling for those living within the home. Over the weeks, the Henderson family began to recognize patterns in the activity. The crying was most prevalent in the late hours of the night, often when the household was quiet. Doors moved at intervals, sometimes in response to the investigators' questions, suggesting the spirit could exert a limited influence on the physical environment. Margaret noted that the crying seemed less erratic when she spoke softly to the figure, acknowledging its presence, though the emotion behind the sobs remained palpable. Despite the fear the events inspired, the family chose to remain in the home. They took precautions, keeping lights on in certain rooms and avoiding prolonged exposure in areas where the crying was most frequent. They also began to speak softly to the presence during occurrences, offering words of comfort. Over time, the activity appeared to become less intense, though the sorrowful sobs were never fully absent. Cameras continued to capture doors moving and faint figures in the hallways, serving as reminders that the past still lingered within the walls. Visitors occasionally commented on the peculiar atmosphere in the house. Some felt a sudden chill or a heaviness in the air, particularly near the living room or upstairs bedrooms. Others reported hearing muffled sobs or whispers when standing quietly in certain areas. For those sensitive to the unseen, the house conveyed a profound sense of loss and longing, a reminder of the tragedies that can leave lasting imprints on the places we inhabit. The phenomenon in the Henderson home exemplifies a haunting tied not to anger or vengeance, but to grief and memory. The crying woman, whether a residual imprint or an intelligent presence, continues to express her sorrow, leaving subtle signs of her existence through sound, shadow, and movement. While unnerving, the presence is not harmful, serving as a somber reminder of the emotional resonance that can linger long after life ends. In Baltimore, the Hendersons' home remains a quiet witness to the past. The crying, the shifting doors, and the fleeting shadows serve as echoes of a long-lost family member, a spirit trapped in a cycle of mourning. For those who live there, and for those who visit, the experience is both unsettling and poignant, a tangible reminder that some grief cannot be contained, leaving behind traces in the spaces where life once unfolded. The home continues to stand as a testament to memory, loss, and the enduring presence of a sorrowful spirit. In the heart of New Orleans, Louisiana, nestled among the historic French Quarter row houses, the DuPont family moved into a charming, century-old home. The property was a mix of elegance and history, with creaking hardwood floors, tall arched windows, and ornate moldings that reflected the city's rich past. From the start, the home felt alive, almost as though it carried echoes of the countless families that had come before. At first, this liveliness seemed charming, but it soon revealed the more mysterious and unsettling side. The first incident occurred one humid summer evening. The DuPonts had recently acquired a small, antique music box at a local flea market. The music box was delicate, adorned with brass detailing and painted floral designs. It sat atop a side table in the living room, its wind-up mechanism requiring a gentle twist to play its lullaby melody. That night, as the family prepared for bed, the music box began to play on its own. The sound was soft, tinkling, and eerily beautiful, yet no one had wound it up or touched it. Startled, they rushed to the table. But the mechanism was still intact, no batteries had been inserted, and the key was untouched. At first the DuPonts tried to rationalize the event. Perhaps the music box had a faulty spring or an unseen wind-up release. But the music persisted, appearing at random intervals throughout the following days. Sometimes it played in the middle of the night, filling the darkened rooms with its haunting melody. At other times, it would start while the family was in the kitchen or watching television, seemingly responding to no one's presence. The sound of the music brought a mix of fascination and unease, and soon, other odd occurrences began to accompany it. The family started noticing a distinct sense of being watched. Shadows seemed to flicker in the corners of rooms, and cold drafts moved along hallways where no windows or vents existed. On several occasions, soft whispers could be heard in the background of the music, faint but unmistakably human. Sometimes the voices seemed to repeat fragmented words, almost as though they were trying to communicate, yet their meaning remained elusive. The combination of melody and whispers gave the house a surreal, otherworldly quality, as if the music box were channeling something beyond the realm of the living. To document the events, the DuPonts installed cameras and audio recorders throughout the home. On reviewing the footage, they discovered chilling evidence. The music box began playing while the room remained empty, and shadows danced across the walls in time with the tune. Audio recordings captured faint murmurs intertwining with the melody, phrases too soft and fragmented to be fully understood. Sometimes, the music box seemed to respond to the investigators' presence, starting or stopping shortly after they entered a room. The activity was intelligent, purposeful, and undeniably supernatural. Paranormal experts were called to investigate the home. Equipped with thermal cameras, EMF meters, and voice recorders, they observed a range of unusual phenomena. Cold spots appeared near the music box, even when the room temperature was otherwise normal. EMF readings fluctuated unpredictably, suggesting the presence of an unseen force. During an audio session, the investigators heard whispers that seemed to echo the same eerie lullaby, and at times, the faint sound of footsteps moving around the room. They concluded that the music box was acting as a conduit, a focal point for an energy that had lingered within the house for decades. Research into the home's past revealed that it had once belonged to a wealthy Creole family in the early 1900s. One of the daughters, a young girl named Eloise, had been fond of a music box similar to the one now in the DuPont's home. Records indicated that Eloise had died tragically at a young age, and her favorite possessions, including her music box, had been sold or lost over time. Paranormal investigators speculated that the spirit of Eloise, or her lingering energy, might have attached itself to the music box, causing it to play repeatedly as a form of expression or communication. The accompanying whispers could be fragments of her voice, tied to memories of the home and the music she loved. Over time, the DuPonts learned to coexist with the phenomenon, treating the music box with care and respect. They found that acknowledging the presence seemed to lessen the intensity of the activity. Occasionally, they would speak softly to the music box, as if addressing a child, and the melody would continue without interruption. Despite the eerie occurrences, the music itself had a strangely comforting quality, a reminder that the energy, though unsettling, was not malicious. Visitors to the house often commented on the haunting melody drifting through the rooms, sensing a presence they could not see. Some reported feeling chills or seeing faint shadows moving along the walls in time with the music. Others claimed to hear whispers, though they could not make out the words. For the DuPonts, the music box had become a tangible link to the past, a reminder of lives once lived in the home and the emotional imprints left behind. The Phantom Music Box of New Orleans stands as a testament to the enduring power of memory and the ways it can manifest in the physical world. It plays without hands, sings without a voice, and whispers without lips, bridging the gap between the living and the dead. For the DuPonts, it is a presence both eerie and poignant, a nightly reminder that some spirits, like melodies, refuse to fade. The music continues, gentle and persistent, a haunting echo of a long-lost life that still lingers within the walls of the house, leaving anyone who listens with the undeniable sense that the past is very much alive. In a quiet suburban neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois, the Peterson family settled into an older two-story home, charmed by its spacious rooms, vintage woodwork, and historic character. At first the house seemed perfect. The living room's large bay windows let in plenty of sunlight. The kitchen maintained its original tile, and the hallways echoed faintly with the voices of past conversations, adding a sense of warmth and nostalgia. But it wasn't long before the Petersons began noticing things that could not be explained. The first unsettling incident occurred one evening when Karen Peterson, the mother, walked down the hallway to check on her teenage daughter, Emily. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a small child standing at the far end of the hall. The figure was dressed in old-fashioned clothing, a pale dress reminiscent of decades past. Startled, Karen called out, asking the child if she needed help. The figure didn't respond. As she approached, the child simply vanished, one moment standing there, the next, gone. The sudden disappearance left Karen frozen, her heart pounding with disbelief. Over the next several nights, similar sightings occurred. Both Karen and her husband, David, reported seeing a child standing silently in hallways or peeking around corners. The figure never spoke, never moved when directly observed, and always vanished if approached. Sometimes, the child seemed almost translucent, a shadow of its own form, while other times it appeared more solid but blurred, as if the edges of the body were fading into the air. The Petersons began noticing additional phenomena. Footsteps echoed softly across empty rooms. Toys that hadn't been played with moved slightly, and the occasional door would creak open on its own. Concerned and unnerved, the Petersons installed home security cameras throughout the house to capture any unusual activity. Reviewing the footage, they discovered a series of disturbing recordings. In one clip, a blurry figure appeared at the end of the hallway, small in stature, with indistinct features. It lingered for several seconds, then faded away as if it had never been there. The cameras also picked up subtle movements elsewhere in the house, the faint rocking of a chair, objects shifting slightly on shelves, and fleeting shadows passing just out of frame. The footage confirmed what the family already feared: something unseen, something beyond ordinary explanation, was inhabiting their home. Seeking answers, the Petersons contacted a local paranormal investigation team, equipped with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and audio recorders. The investigators spent several nights documenting the activity. They recorded cold spots in various rooms, particularly the hallways where the child had been seen. EMF readings spiked unpredictably, and audio devices captured faint whispers and the soft, almost imperceptible sounds of children playing. Thermal imaging occasionally revealed small, human-shaped figures that appeared and disappeared in moments, consistent with eyewitness reports of the vanishing child. Research into the home's history offered potential insight into the haunting. The house had been built in the early 1900s and had been home to several families over the decades. Investigators discovered records indicating that a young child had died in the house nearly 50 years prior, the result of an illness that swept through the neighborhood. Neighbors recalled stories of the child's tragic passing and whispered that the family had never fully recovered from the loss. Paranormal experts theorized that the child's spirit may have remained tied to the home, lingering in the hallways where it had once walked, replaying fragments of life cut short. The Petersons began noticing that the activity was most pronounced in the evenings and during moments of quiet in the house. The child's presence was accompanied by a subtle feeling of melancholy, an emotional weight that hung in the hallways. At times, they could hear faint giggles or the sound of small footsteps pacing along the wooden floors, always stopping suddenly when someone entered the area. The family grew accustomed to the presence, understanding that it seemed to observe rather than threaten, offering only glimpses of a life interrupted. Over time, the Petersons developed a routine to coexist with the child's presence. They spoke gently when passing through the hallways, leaving small toys and trinkets in places where the child had been seen, as if offering comfort and acknowledgement. Surprisingly, these gestures appeared to lessen the intensity of the activity. The child no longer appeared as frequently, and when it did, the figure seemed calmer, lingering for shorter periods before fading away. The family interpreted this as a sign that the spirit was aware of their recognition and perhaps felt at ease with their acknowledgement. Visitors to the house occasionally reported the same phenomena. Some felt sudden chills while walking down the hallways. Others claimed to see fleeting movements at the edges of their vision, and a few described the sense of a small, watching presence in quiet moments. No one reported fear or hostility, only the eerie and poignant feeling that a young life had left its mark on the home. The vanishing child of the Peterson household stands as a testament to the enduring imprint of those who passed too soon. The hallways, once filled with laughter and footsteps of the living, now echo faintly with the presence of a spirit tied to the past. Though unseen by most, the child continues to wander the home, a silent reminder of life interrupted and the persistence of memory. The Petersons, while sometimes unsettled, have grown to respect and acknowledge the presence, understanding that some spirits linger not out of malice, but out of attachment, leaving a gentle, haunting echo in the spaces they once inhabited. In Chicago, the Peterson home remains both a sanctuary and a mystery, where the ephemeral figure of a child appears at the edge of perception. The security footage, whispers, and fleeting glimpses serve as evidence that even decades later, the past can leave an enduring presence. For the Petersons, the experience has been a mixture of fear, fascination, and quiet empathy, as they live alongside the vanishing child who continues to walk the halls of their home. In a quiet residential neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, the Monroe family moved into a modern yet cozy home, attracted by its open floor plan, high ceilings, and proximity to the city's vibrant culture. Initially, the house seemed perfect a place where their family could grow and make memories. But soon after moving in, subtle and inexplicable events began to unsettle the household, hinting at a presence they could neither see nor fully understand. The first unusual incident occurred one evening when Jessica Monroe, the mother, was tidying the living room. As she glanced toward the far corner, she noticed a small, glowing light hovering in the air near the ceiling. At first, she assumed it was a reflection or a trick of the dim lighting. But the light moved deliberately, gliding across the room before vanishing entirely. Shaken, she called her husband, Michael, who observed the room with a flashlight, but nothing unusual appeared. They dismissed it as an optical illusion, yet the sense that something was watching lingered in the back of their minds. Over the next few nights, the activity intensified. The family began noticing faint cold drafts moving through the house despite the air conditioning being off and windows closed. Occasionally, they would hear whispers indistinct, soft, and fleeting seeming to come from empty spaces within the living room or hallway. These auditory phenomena were unsettling particularly when the house was silent and the family alone. Michael, a practical man, tried to explain the occurrences through natural causes, air leaks, settling of the building, or neighborhood noises. But the whispers were too consistent, too deliberate to dismiss as ordinary sounds. Concerned, the Monroes installed security cameras in the living room and hallway to capture any unusual activity. Reviewing the footage, one evening revealed something chilling. Several glowing orbs drifting across the room. They moved with smooth, deliberate motion, floating from wall to wall, sometimes hovering near objects as if observing them. The orbs emitted a soft, otherworldly light, sometimes bright and sometimes dim, yet they never touched the furniture or floor. At times, the cameras captured the orbs interacting with the air itself, causing subtle ripples in the environment, like invisible currents following their path. The family sought the help of a local paranormal investigation team, equipped with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field meters, and digital audio devices. The experts spent several nights in the house, documenting the phenomena. They observed that the orbs appeared more frequently during late-night hours, particularly when the household was quiet. EMF readings occasionally spiked, though inconsistently, while thermal cameras revealed sudden cold spots where the orbs would hover. Audio recordings captured soft, indecipherable whispers in tandem with the appearance of the glowing spheres. Investigators confirmed that no electronic devices, reflections, or wiring anomalies could have produced the orbs. Their movements were intelligent and independent, suggesting a non-physical source. The presence appeared to be aware of the humans in the home, observing and interacting with the environment subtly, though without any aggressive or harmful intent. Researchers noted that the glowing orbs are often associated with spirits or residual energy, particularly in homes with a long or unusual history. A search into the history of the home provided potential context. The property had been built on the site of a 1920s craftsman house, which had changed ownership multiple times. Previous residents had occasionally reported odd lights and fleeting shadows, though records were scarce. Some longtime neighbors spoke of tragedies associated with the original family, early deaths, sudden illnesses, and accidents that might have left residual energy lingering in the space. Paranormal experts theorized that the orbs could be manifestations of this energy, residual echoes of past events seeking expression through light and motion. Over time, the Monroes became more familiar with the behavior of the orbs. They noticed that the spheres often appeared near objects with personal significance, like photographs, heirlooms, or items connected to memory. Sometimes, when the family spoke softly or acknowledged the orbs, the light would intensify briefly, as though responding to human presence. The whispers, though still faint and fragmented, seemed less alarming when met with calm observation rather than fear. Visitors to the house occasionally experienced the phenomenon as well. Friends reported sudden chills in the living room, a feeling of being watched, and glimpses of floating lights at the edges of their vision. Some claimed to hear whispers, though they could not make out the words. The Monroes treated the events with respect, understanding that the glowing orbs represented a presence that, while unsettling, was not malevolent. They avoided startling or antagonizing it, opting instead for acknowledgement and cautious coexistence. The glowing orbs in the Monroe home exemplify the mysterious ways that residual energy or spiritual presence can manifest. They float through the living room, silently observing, accompanied by whispers and cold drafts, a reminder of the unseen layers of history within the home. The Monroes have learned to coexist with the phenomenon, balancing curiosity and caution, finding a strange comfort in the knowledge that the energy is aware, persistent, and present. In Los Angeles, the Monroe home remains a place where the ordinary meets the extraordinary. The glowing orbs drift silently through the rooms, a haunting yet mesmerizing spectacle that continues to captivate all who witness them. Whispers echo faintly in empty spaces, cold air sweeps through the house without explanation, and cameras capture fleeting glimpses of light that defy logic. For the family, the phenomenon is both unsettling and fascinating. A reminder that in certain places the past never truly leaves and unseen presences may linger, manifesting as ethereal lights and subtle whispers that hint at a world just beyond perception. In a quiet neighborhood of Miami, Florida, the Alvarez family moved into a contemporary home with sleek architecture and spacious interiors. At first, the house seemed ideal, bright, airy, and comfortable. But it wasn't long before subtle, inexplicable occurrences began to unsettle the family, hinting at the presence of something far beyond the ordinary. The first incident occurred late one evening when Alina Alvarez, the mother, was walking down the hallway toward the kitchen. She caught a glimpse of a tall, dark figure standing near the entrance to the living room. The figure was humanoid in shape, but entirely shadowy, its features indiscernible and its presence unnervingly still. Startled, Alina called out, but the figure didn't respond. As she approached, it simply faded into the darkness, leaving behind a cold, lingering sensation that seemed to crawl across her skin. Over the next few nights, similar events unfolded. The Alvarez family began hearing footsteps in rooms that were empty. The soft tap of shoes on tile or hardwood, pacing slowly and then stopping suddenly. Doors creaked open and closed on their own, sometimes gently, sometimes with startling force. On occasion, they would hear whispers indistinct, low, and seemingly just out of reach appearing behind them as they walked through hallways or moved about their home. The whispers never formed complete words, but carried a tone that was urgent, as if trying to communicate something important. Concerned and increasingly uneasy, the Alvarez family installed cameras and audio recorders throughout the house. Reviewing the footage one night, they were shocked to discover a tall, shadowy figure moving through the living room. The figure's outline was faint, yet unmistakable, and it glided across the room as though it were observing the space. Security footage also captured doors opening and closing without explanation, and audio recordings confirmed the presence of whispers and faint footsteps echoing in empty rooms. The family could no longer dismiss the occurrences as tricks of the imagination. Seeking answers, the Alvarez family reached out to a local paranormal investigation team, equipped with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field meters, and digital audio devices. The investigators spent several nights documenting the activity. From the moment they entered, they reported feeling a distinct heaviness in the air, especially in the living room and hallway where the figure was most often seen. EMF readings fluctuated irregularly, and thermal imaging revealed cold spots that appeared to move independently through the rooms. Audio devices recorded whispers and footsteps consistent with the family's experiences. The investigators observed that the shadowy figure seemed to react to human presence. It would appear in areas of the home when people were nearby, then retreat or vanish when approached. The phenomenon displayed signs of intelligence, interacting with the environment, subtly sliding doors slightly ajar, creating drafts, or causing objects to shift. There was no indication of malice. Rather, the presence appeared observant, its behavior deliberate, as though bound to the house, yet aware of those who lived there. Research into the home's history revealed potential explanations for the haunting. The property had been built in the mid-20th century and had seen a succession of residents. Previous occupants reported similar experiences: shadows moving along walls, unexplained sounds, and sudden cold spots. Historical records suggested that one early resident had died unexpectedly in the house, leaving a spouse and children behind. Paranormal experts theorized that the shadowy apparition could be a residual imprint of that individual or a lingering presence tied to unfinished business or emotional attachment to the home. Over time, the Alvarez family began to recognize patterns in the activity. The apparition was most active in the late evening and early morning hours, particularly when the house was quiet. Footsteps would echo along hallways, often in sequences that mimicked normal household movement, yet no one was present. Whispers seemed to correspond with these movements, creating an unsettling sense of being observed and followed. Doors would open or close just as family members approached, as though the entity were guiding them or responding to their presence. Despite the fear these experiences inspired, the Alvarez family chose to coexist with the phenomenon. They treated the shadowy presence with caution and respect, speaking softly when moving through areas where it appeared, and avoiding unnecessary disturbances. Interestingly, the apparition's activity seemed to lessen slightly when acknowledged calmly, suggesting that the entity was aware of the family's recognition. Over time, the Alvarez family learned to live with the presence, adjusting routines to accommodate the unusual environment while remaining mindful of its influence. Visitors to the home occasionally sensed the same presence. Some reported sudden chills or an oppressive feeling of being watched, while others claimed to see fleeting shadows at the edge of their vision. Few could explain the whispers, which seemed just beyond comprehension, yet undeniably human in tone. Those sensitive to paranormal phenomena noted that the shadowy figure gave the impression of intelligence and awareness, rather than anger or malice, making the home feel haunted but not dangerous. The shadowy apparition in the Alvarez home stands as a testament to the enduring impact of emotional energy and memory on physical spaces. The tall figure glides silently through rooms, accompanied by footsteps and whispers that hint at a presence aware of the living yet bound to the house. For the Alvarez family, the experience has been both unsettling and fascinating, a daily reminder that some energies persist long after their origin, leaving traces that are seen, heard, and felt. In Miami, this home continues to bear witness to its unseen visitor. The shadowy figure moves through hallways and living spaces, unseen by most but leaving unmistakable signs of its presence. Footsteps echo, doors shift without explanation, and whispers linger in the air, all serving as reminders that the past can remain tangible, and that some spirits never truly leave the spaces they once inhabited. The Alvarez family lives alongside this haunting, navigating the intersection of ordinary life and the extraordinary, ever aware of the quiet, watchful presence that shares their home. In a historic neighborhood of Boston, Massachusetts, the Sullivan family moved into a late 19th century townhouse with hopes of settling into a quiet, comfortable life. The house, with its brick facade, narrow staircases, and tall arched windows, held the charm of old Boston while offering modern conveniences. But soon after moving in, the family began experiencing inexplicable occurrences that left them unsettled and fearful of the unseen. The first incidents were subtle, almost dismissible at first. Mary Sullivan, the mother, would awaken in the middle of the night with the sensation of a hand brushing against her shoulder or arm. At first, she assumed it was a dream, or perhaps her husband shifting in bed. However, the sensation persisted, and soon other members of the family reported similar experiences. David, her husband, felt gentle pressure on his back, as though someone were leaning against him, while their teenage son, Ethan, described the feeling of being tapped on the shoulder by invisible fingers while reading in his room. The touches were never harmful, but unmistakably real, leaving chills and a sense of vulnerability. As the nights went on, additional phenomena became impossible to ignore. Lights in the home flickered erratically, sometimes brightening and dimming in rapid succession, other times pulsing gently. Objects began shifting without explanation. Books would slide off shelves, cups would move slightly across countertops, and small items would disappear from one room only to reappear in another. The family's anxiety grew, and they quickly realized that the house was far from ordinary. In an effort to understand the disturbances, the Sullivans installed cameras and audio recorders throughout the home. Reviewing the footage revealed startling activity. Objects moved on their own, across tables and shelves, sometimes in patterns that suggested intent rather than random motion. The lights flickered in tandem with the shifting items, creating an eerie, synchronized effect. Audio recordings captured faint voices, speaking in fragmented phrases, often repeating the names of family members. These electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, appeared to acknowledge the occupants directly, heightening the sense of an intelligent presence moving within the home. Seeking further answers, the family contacted a local paranormal investigation team. Investigators arrived with thermal imaging cameras, EMF detectors, and sensitive audio equipment. From the moment they entered, they reported an oppressive energy within the home, particularly in the bedrooms and hallways where the Sullivan family had reported the most frequent contact. Cold spots were detected at irregular intervals, and EMF readings spiked in areas where objects were observed to move. Thermal cameras occasionally revealed fleeting human-shaped figures, though always indistinct, as if cloaked in shadows. During an EVP session, the investigators attempted to communicate directly with the presence. When asked who was in the home, the audio devices captured faint whispers repeating names of the living family members. The voices were soft, almost pleading, and seemed to respond in real time to questions posed by the investigators. The sensations of unseen touches became more pronounced during these sessions, with investigators feeling pressure on their arms, shoulders, and backs. No one present could see the source, yet the interactions were unmistakably physical. Historical research into the property suggested possible explanations for the haunting. The townhouse had been home to multiple families over more than a century, and records indicated that the house had witnessed deaths, tragedies, and untimely illnesses. Some accounts suggested that previous occupants had reported similar sensations of being touched at night and hearing their names whispered in empty rooms. Paranormal experts theorized that the home retained residual energy, possibly tied to the strong emotional experiences of former residents. This energy, however, appeared to interact intelligently, rather than simply replaying past events, responding directly to the current occupants of the house. The Sullivan family soon began to notice patterns in the activity. The unseen touches were most frequent late at night, often when the household was silent. The objects would shift near the areas where family members were seated or sleeping, and the lights often flickered in response to movement in the rooms. The whispers were particularly persistent when family members called out names or spoke aloud, suggesting that the energy was aware of and attentive to the living occupants. While initially frightening, the family realized that the presence seemed curious and observant rather than malicious. To coexist with the activity, the Sullivans adopted certain routines. They began leaving lights on in specific areas at night, speaking calmly to the unseen presence when it became active, and documenting all occurrences for reference. Over time, they noticed that the intensity of the touches and the movement of objects lessened when they approached the activity with calm acknowledgement rather than fear. The family came to understand that, while the presence was mysterious and at times unnerving, it did not intend to cause harm. Visitors to the Sullivan home occasionally felt the same phenomena. Some reported sudden chills, a faint pressure on their shoulders, or an eerie sensation of being observed. Others noticed lights flickering and small objects shifting during their stay. Most described the experience as unsettling yet strangely respectful, as though the unseen presence recognized the visitor's awareness without hostility. The phenomenon of the unseen touches in the Boston townhouse demonstrates a haunting that is both interactive and emotionally charged. It is a presence that acknowledges the living, manipulates the physical environment, and communicates through whispers and subtle touches. The Sullivans have learned to live alongside this enigmatic force, navigating the balance between ordinary life and extraordinary activity. In Boston, the Sullivan home remains a place where the boundary between the seen and unseen is thin. Lights continue to flicker, objects shift mysteriously, and unseen hands brush against occupants in the still of the night. Voices echo softly, calling names, and the sensation of being watched or touched lingers in quiet moments. For the Sullivan family, the experience has been unsettling but also awe-inspiring. A constant reminder that some energies remain tied to places long after their origin, leaving behind tangible, mysterious traces that challenge the very nature of reality. In a quiet, residential area of Dallas, Texas, the Reynolds family moved into a contemporary brick home that offered spacious rooms and a peaceful neighborhood. At first, the house seemed perfect, well-maintained, comfortable, and welcoming. But it wasn't too long before the family began experiencing unsettling occurrences that suggested something otherworldly had taken notice of their presence. The first sign of strange activity came late one evening when Laura Reynolds, the mother, was walking down the hallway toward the kitchen. She noticed a fleeting shape near the living room while a tall, humanoid figure that seemed to shimmer and partially disappear as it moved. Startled, she froze in place. The figure walked across the room and passed straight through the wall without hesitation, vanishing as suddenly as it appeared. The sudden disappearance left her shaken, and an inexplicable chill ran down her spine. She called her husband, Mark, but by the time he arrived, there was no trace of the apparition. Over the next few nights, similar experiences occurred. Both Laura and Mark reported cold drafts that seemed to move through the house, independently of the air conditioning or open windows. At times, they felt sudden waves of dread, an oppressive sensation that pressed heavily on their chests, usually when the figure appeared. Their teenage daughter, Emily, also described seeing glimpses of a translucent figure walking past walls and hallways, always visible for only a brief moment before vanishing entirely. In an effort to document the activity, the Reynolds family installed security cameras throughout the house. Reviewing the footage revealed startling evidence. Several times, a blurry figure could be seen walking across rooms, sometimes phasing through walls. The movements were deliberate, almost as if the figure were exploring or observing the home. Other footage captured the figure disappearing into walls, leaving behind faint distortions in the camera's image. These recordings confirmed what the family had suspected: something beyond ordinary explanation was inhabiting their home. Paranoid but seeking understanding, the family contacted a local paranormal investigation team. The investigators arrived with thermal cameras, EMF meters, and digital audio recorders, hoping to capture additional evidence. From the moment they entered the home, they sensed an unusual energy. The air felt heavy in certain areas, and cold spots appeared intermittently along the hallways and in the living room. EMF readings fluctuated unpredictably, often peaking when the figure was visible on camera or when the investigators entered particular rooms. Audio recordings captured faint whispers that could not be attributed to any living person inside the home. During an evening investigation, the team attempted to communicate with the presence. Questions were asked aloud, and the audio devices picked up low, fragmented murmurs that seemed to correspond to the investigators' voices. At the same time, those present reported an increase in cold drafts and a palpable sense of unease, as though the entity's attention was focused on them. The phasing figure was observed on the thermal camera as a faint, human-shaped heat distortion moving through walls, confirming that the activity was not purely visual but had a subtle, physical presence. Research into the home's history suggested potential origins for the phenomenon. The property had been built in the early 20th century and had passed through several owners. Historical records indicated that one previous resident had died unexpectedly in the house, leaving behind a grieving spouse and young children. Neighbors recalled stories of disturbances in the home, including unexplained sounds and sightings of shadowy figures moving through walls. Paranormal experts speculated that the entity might be the lingering presence of that past resident, bound to the house by unfinished business, strong emotional energy, or attachment to the home. Over time, the Reynolds family began noticing patterns in the activity. The figure appeared most frequently during the late evening and early morning hours, especially in areas of the home where the family spent quiet moments. Cold drafts and sudden feelings of dread accompanied its presence, sometimes causing them to pause mid-activity. They observed that acknowledging the presence, rather than panicking, seemed to reduce its intensity slightly. Over time, they learned to coexist with the apparition, understanding that while its appearance was unsettling, it showed no overt signs of hostility. Visitors to the home occasionally experienced similar phenomena. Some reported feeling sudden chills or a heavy sense of dread as they walked through hallways. Others described glimpsing fleeting shadows or translucent forms out of the corner of their eyes, vanishing when looked at directly. Audio recordings captured whispers that seemed to respond to questions, further reinforcing the idea that the presence was intelligent and aware. The phasing figure in the Dallas home stands as a striking example of a haunting that bridges the physical and spiritual worlds. Its ability to pass through walls, combined with the cold drafts, whispers, and feelings of dread, illustrates the complex ways that energy can linger in a space long after its origin. For the Reynolds family, living alongside this presence has required patience, observation, and respect, as they navigate life in a home that is shared with an unseen occupant. In Dallas, the Reynolds house remains a place where the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary is thin. The phasing figure continues to drift through walls and rooms, visible for only fleeting moments, yet leaving an undeniable impression. Cold drafts sweep along the hallways, whispers echo faintly, and feelings of dread surface unexpectedly. For those who live there, and even for visitors, the presence serves as a constant reminder that some spirits remain tethered to places they once knew, moving silently yet persistently phasing through walls as they observe the living from the world beyond. In a quiet Charlotte, North Carolina neighborhood, the Mitchell family moved into a charming, older home with a spacious living area, high ceilings, and large windows that let in abundant sunlight. At first, the house seemed perfect, a safe, welcoming space where the family could settle and enjoy life. But soon after moving in, subtle disturbances began to unsettle the family, hinting at a presence that could not be explained by ordinary means. The first unusual incident occurred late one evening when Laura Mitchell, the mother, was folding laundry in the living room. She heard a faint, high-pitched laugh echo through the empty room. At first, she assumed it was her imagination, perhaps a trick of the acoustics or a sound from outside. But the laughter persisted, soft and almost childlike, coming from corners where no one could be hiding. She called for her husband, David, and their teenage son, Alex, but the room was empty, and the sound ceased as suddenly as it began. Over the next several nights, the activity intensified. The family began noticing objects moving on their own books, sliding slightly on shelves, toys shifting across the floor, and kitchen utensils appearing in places they hadn't been left. Curtains swayed gently even when the windows were closed, as though an unseen hand had brushed against the fabric. The laughter returned intermittently, echoing through empty rooms and hallways, creating an unsettling sense of presence. The sound was playful yet eerie, sending chills down the family's spines while simultaneously provoking a strange curiosity. In an effort to document these occurrences, the Mitchells installed cameras throughout the home. Reviewing the footage, one night revealed shadowy figures moving across the floors, barely discernible but unmistakable in their presence. One video showed a dark silhouette gliding along the hallway, its movements fluid and deliberate, passing behind objects as though walking through them. At the same time, the curtains fluttered inexplicably, and a faint, playful laughter could be heard on the audio recording. These images confirmed what the family had already suspected. Their home was inhabited by something beyond the ordinary. The Mitchells sought the assistance of a local paranormal investigation team, armed with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and sensitive audio equipment. The investigators spent several nights in the home documenting the phenomena. Cold spots were detected in areas where the laughter was most frequently heard, particularly in the living room and hallway. EMF readings spiked unexpectedly, sometimes in sync with objects moving on their own. Thermal imaging occasionally revealed indistinct human-shaped figures, often fleeting and difficult to capture, yet consistent with eyewitness accounts. Audio devices recorded the laughter clearly on several occasions, accompanied by faint whispers and murmurs that were indecipherable yet unmistakably human. The investigators theorized that the laughter and movements were manifestations of a spirit or energy that remained in the home, perhaps linked to a former occupant or an emotional residue left behind from past events. Historical research into the property revealed that the house had been built in the early 1900s and had been home to multiple families over the decades. Some previous residents reportedly experienced similar phenomena, including sounds of laughter, moving objects, and shadows appearing in hallways. Over time, the Mitchell family began recognizing patterns in the activity. The laughter tended to occur in the evenings, particularly when the household was quiet, and the shadowy figures were most active in the hallways and living room. Objects seemed to move in areas where the family spent the most time, almost as if the presence were observing or interacting with their daily lives. The phenomenon was not aggressive. Rather, it gave the impression of curiosity and playfulness, though still unsettling in its unpredictability. The family learned to coexist with the presence, speaking calmly when moving through areas where activity had been observed and documenting every occurrence. Interestingly, acknowledging the phenomena seemed to temper its intensity. When the family approached the laughter and shadows with calm awareness rather than fear, the manifestations often became less pronounced, appearing more sporadically and gently. Over time, the Mitchells accepted that the home was shared with an unseen presence that seemed more curious than harmful, its playful energy lingering in the shadows. Visitors to the Mitchell home occasionally experienced the same phenomena. Some felt sudden chills, unexplained drafts, or the sense of being watched. Others reported seeing fleeting shadows at the edges of their vision, and a few even heard the high-pitched laughter echoing through hallways. The presence, while unnerving, appeared to interact with visitors in much the same way it did with the family, playful, observant, and nonviolent. The ghostly laughter in the Charlotte home illustrates how residual energy or spiritual presence can leave tangible traces in a living space. Shadowy figures move across the floor, objects shift without explanation, and curtains sway gently without any breeze. Laughter echoes through empty rooms, a sound that is simultaneously eerie and strangely alive, hinting at the presence of a spirit aware of those who inhabit the house. For the Mitchell family, the experience has been a mixture of fear, fascination, and cautious respect. They live alongside a presence that is playful yet unpredictable, a constant reminder that some energies remain tethered to places long after their origin. In Charlotte, this home stands as a testament to the unseen, where shadow figures glide silently across the floors. Laughter rings out in empty rooms, and the boundary between the living and the spiritual remains intriguingly thin. The Mitchells have adapted to this coexistence, learning to navigate a home where the ordinary and extraordinary intertwine, and where the echoes of the past continue to linger in both sound and shadow. In the quiet, historic town of Burlington, Vermont, the Matthews family moved into a centuries-old home with the charm and character of New England architecture. With its creaking wooden floors, antique fixtures, and large windows overlooking tree-lined streets, the house seemed perfect for raising a family. Yet, within weeks of moving in, the family began experiencing strange occurrences that defied explanation, hinting at a lingering presence tied to the home's long history. The first unsettling incident occurred late one evening when Sarah Matthews, the mother, was preparing dinner. She noticed a small vase floating across the dining room table. Startled, she froze as it glided silently and gracefully before landing upright on the other side of the table. At first, she assumed a draft or imbalance had caused it to tip. But when her husband, Greg, examined the room, all windows and doors were securely closed. Later that night, they both heard faint footsteps pacing the hallway above them, though no one was awake or moving around the house. As days passed, the activity intensified. Objects seemed to float or shift subtly, books sliding off shelves, chairs nudged slightly across the floor, and kitchen utensils rearranged without explanation. Family members reported feeling sudden cold spots in certain areas, chills that seemed to move along with them, and an oppressive sensation of being watched. The phenomena were both visible and tactile, leaving the family unsettled but also determined to understand what was happening. In response, the Matthews installed cameras and recording devices throughout the home to capture any unusual activity. Reviewing the footage revealed shadowy shapes moving along the floors and walls, sometimes stopping momentarily as if observing the family before continuing. One particularly eerie recording showed a figure gliding through the living room, pausing near a chair before disappearing into the hallway. Audio recordings also picked up faint whispers and the sound of crying, seeming to echo from empty rooms. The cries were soft but distinct, accompanied by gentle murmurs that resembled human speech, though no one could discern the words. Concerned and curious, the family reached out to a team of local paranormal investigators. The team arrived equipped with thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and high-sensitivity audio recorders. From the moment they entered, the investigators felt a distinct energy throughout the home. Cold spots were detected in rooms where shadowy figures were frequently observed, particularly in the living room and upstairs hallways. EMF readings fluctuated irregularly, spiking without cause. Thermal cameras occasionally revealed transient human-shaped heat distortions, confirming the family's reports of both visual and tactile anomalies. During a controlled investigation, the team conducted EVP sessions to communicate with any entities present. Faint crying and whispering were recorded in response to questions, often repeating fragments of words or expressing a mournful tone. Investigators described an oppressive but not aggressive presence, an energy that seemed bound to the home, yet curious about the living. At times, the investigators felt a subtle pressure on their shoulders or the sensation of being lightly brushed by unseen hands, reinforcing the tangible nature of the haunting. Historical research into the Burlington home provided context for the haunting. The property had been constructed in the early 1800s and had witnessed numerous events over the decades, including births, deaths, and tragedies common to the era. Historical records suggested that several children had died in the house during the 19th century, and one early resident had reportedly perished under mysterious circumstances. Paranormal experts theorized that these events could have left residual energy in the home, which now manifested as floating objects, shadow figures, and audible cries. The whispers and emotional impressions appeared to be tied to those who had lived and suffered in the house centuries ago. Over time, the Matthews family began to notice patterns in the activity. The floating objects were most active in the evenings, often appearing in rooms where the family spent the most time. Shadowy figures moved silently along hallways, usually at the edge of vision, and the crying or whispering often coincided with their presence. While initially frightening, the family realized the phenomenon was not hostile. Instead, it seemed to communicate a lingering sorrow, an echo of the lives once connected to the home. To coexist with the haunting, the Matthews family adopted a cautious routine. They documented each occurrence, spoke softly in areas where activity was frequent, and avoided startling the presence. They also researched the history of the house and shared it with the children, teaching them to approach the unseen with respect rather than fear. Over time, the intensity of the manifestations appeared to lessen slightly, though occasional floating objects and fleeting shadows continued to remind the family that the home was still inhabited by the past. Visitors to the home occasionally sensed the presence as well. Some felt sudden chills or an inexplicable heaviness in the air, while others reported hearing faint whispers or the sound of footsteps when walking through hallways. Many saw shadowy shapes at the edge of their vision, vanishing when directly observed. Despite the eerie atmosphere, no one experienced aggression from the entity. It remained a silent observer, an echo of lives long gone but still intertwined with the house. The haunting in the Burlington home illustrates how history can leave enduring marks on a physical space. Objects move without explanation. Shadowy figures drift silently across floors. Cold spots appear unpredictably, and voices from the past echo softly through rooms. For the Matthews family, these manifestations serve as a reminder that some energies persist across centuries, leaving subtle but undeniable traces in homes that have witnessed human life, joy, and tragedy. In Burlington, the Matthews home stands as a testament to the lingering presence of history. Floating objects, shadow figures, and whispers of sorrow continue to occupy the space alongside the living, creating a delicate balance between the present and the past. For the family, navigating life in this home requires awareness, respect, and cautious coexistence, as they share their daily lives with echoes of the 1800s unseen, yet profoundly felt. And so, dear viewers, our journey through America's haunted homes comes to an end. 25 true paranormal events where objects move, shadows linger, and the past refuses to rest. These stories remind us that even in the places we call safe, unseen forces may be watching, waiting, and whispering. If you ever encounter such a presence, tread carefully, respect the spirits, and remember, sometimes, home is not truly home. Thank you for walking through these haunted walls with me. Until next time, keep your senses sharp, your courage steady, and remember the unseen is always closer than it appears.